what I am saying, and you have not done it once for me, not even once. So don't go off about some whining stuff, but I'm trying to get you on your political project. It isn't a struggle section.
Okay.
I think
so then
what's
what
going
are your,
on here.
what are
I'm
your
not done. I'm
five
not done. I'm not
favorite
done. I'm
things
not
about
done. I'm not done. I'm not done. I'm not done. I
She's
think
not done,
you're
Ryan.
making
Shut up.
Epistemological error in your assessment of Trump. I'm engaging you in more philosophy than politics. And the reason I keep coming up with examples of Trump being bad is because you keep asking me to substantiate why Trump is anti-liberty, anti-constitution, and a liar. So don't get mad at me that I'm going into philosophy to understand your philosophy, by the way, because you haven't asked about mine. You're certainly not interested in my philosophical system. In fact, you've mostly been fighting ghosts when you talk to me. Do you know what my philosophical system is in any way, shape, or form, and how it shapes my political beliefs? I actually don't think that you do, because you haven't bothered to fucking ask, but I have. And when I've given you examples as to why I think that what you're advocating for violates liberty, the issue that I'm running into is it doesn't seem substantive. And then you ask me for examples of why Trump is anti-liberty, and then I give them. And now you just keep on saying, all I'm asking for you is to say Trump is bad. No, I'm not.
So what are your
I'm
five
trying
favorite
to
things
say-
about Trump?
What kind of fucking question is that to
Well,
respond to everything that
you said it's
What the
not.
fuck is wrong with
You said it's not a struggle.
What the fuck is wrong with you, Ryan? Jesus. How
I am
dare
the
you?
worst. The worst.
Go ahead.
tried to watch this conversation, and after 20 minutes, I want to end my life. I'm so tired of these struggle sessions. As you said, it's perfectly apt. We've gone through this ourselves, where someone comes on, they're like, hey, do you guys like Trump? And I'm like, I don't really like Trump. And it's like, okay, but you don't like Trump enough. You need to say that he is the literal embodiment of Hitler, or we're going to spend the next 2 hours attacking him.
Yeah, I mean, this is my thing, is that I kind of started talking on the internet as a centrist, and have recently kind of realigned to be more on the right. But truthfully, I voted blue my whole life. I sat out the last election because I didn't think either candidate warranted my support. But I've never voted for Trump. In fact, I didn't vote for Trump when I thought he was the better option, because I thought he was disqualified because of the false slate of electors thing. And it's exactly what you said. Most people's issue with me is that I'm not angry enough at Trump. They want me to be angrier for some reason.
Yeah, so we were talking a little bit about this before the stream began. We're here with Ryan. He did this kind of struggle section with with Not So Erudite, which I found highly amusing. She continually tried to get him to admit that his beliefs were in contradiction. He was violating his principles by not hating Trump enough, which it's so interesting, because obviously as human beings, our principles and our beliefs, our moral intuitions come into conflict all the time, where we're forced to choose between which is more important to us, make self-sacrifices to keep to one principle over another. So, I mean, this is a common thing. So I really didn't like this tactic she took. I thought it was extremely bad faith, and I just thought maybe we could talk a little bit about it. We can also talk about whatever you want to talk about, but bad faith, I'm working on kind of a new definition of bad faith, a personal definition of bad faith, and maybe it'll catch on. A lot of people think bad faith means dishonest, which I don't necessarily think that's what's going on here. In these debate type environments, there's really two games that are being played here. There's a game where you're going to vet the various arguments, and then there is the reputation destruction game. And in this debate, she constantly is doing ad hominem attacks. She's sniping, hinting that you're stupid, hinting that you're violating your own principles, you're in contradiction, you're not nice because you're not asking her what she believes, those kind of things. So if you add it all up, if there's more ad hominem attack, more reputation destruction going on than actually engaging with the arguments, I think it's safe to call someone bad faith. What do you think of that kind of argumentation?
Yeah, I think that let me put it this way. That conversation, I reached out to her, and this was back when Destiny was going absolutely nuclear on X, talking about Charlie Kirk's assassination, all the crazy stuff that Destiny was saying at that time. And I wanted to have a conversation with her about that, which she agreed to. And then I said,
that barely comes up.
Well, this is what I'm saying, right? And then she asked for a secondary topic, and I was like, yeah, we could do some culture war stuff if you want. So those are the two topics: culture war stuff and Destiny's insane tweets. And then the conversation starts. And if you watch the very beginning, the first thing I do is I thank her for being gracious to me and try to segue to the Destiny stuff. And instead, she wants to launch into this kind of like faux Socratic examination of my beliefs with the goal of proving that I'm, I guess, incomprehensible or just an idiot for not hating Trump sufficiently. And we never get to the topics I was discussing. So I think, to your bad faith point, that's kind of where eventually at the end of the conversation, I did say she was being bad faith. I resisted it for a long time. And it was because we went in to have one conversation. She wouldn't have that conversation. Instead, she just wanted to come at me. And then I tried to find olive branches. I even moved to like, let's stop talking about this. Let's talk about something else. Let's find some points of agreement. And once I started doing that, she then said, no, I don't want to talk about points of agreement. I want to talk about why you're an incomprehensible idiot, and reverted back to the topic to attack me further. So yeah, I mean, I think at that point you can say, look, this is just somebody who's trying to do, as you said, reputation destruction. That's the goal. And you kind of have to respond in kind at that point. You can't be, you can't keep playing nice if you're engaged in that kind of conversation.
Well, this is the kind of conversation I don't really want to have. I want to be able to talk to people that I actually respect. So if my goal is to destroy your reputation, I have no respect for you, right? Why am I even engaging in a conversation with you? Then we're basically just we're children having a slap fight on the playground.
Well, you could tell that if you watched the conversation quickly, because she asked about my core values. I'm not actually a deontologist, but that's, I didn't think we were doing a deep dive on philosophy, so I didn't get into that with her. But, and I said my core values are natural rights, which are as expressed in the Declaration of Independence. So that's where she sees on liberty, but there's more than one: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. There's property rights, there's the collection. But you could tell what she was doing, because I said the word liberty, and then she's like, well, Trump's anti-liberty. And no other topic of conversation could ever come up. It just had to be why Trump is anti-liberty and why I'm wrong for not hating him enough. And what's interesting is that I really had to hate him a lot. Like, it wasn't even enough that I disagree with a lot of what Trump does. I had to be willing to vote against the Republicans in the midterms to qualify as a sane person in her mind.
Oh, I know. She kept pushing you on the midterm stuff.
I don't think that's a fair ask. Like, I think you can have a political conversation with somebody without saying you have to join my political project, otherwise we can't have a rational and respectful conversation.
Well, the game that they're playing is they're really trying to garner devotees. So she can't really have a conversation with you without thinking she's trying to change your political opinions, which I mean, I really don't engage in that kind of stuff.
Well, I also think there's something about me, and I think it's probably my background, that makes people on the left really frustrated. A, because I used to be on the left, and B, I have a degree in philosophy. I have a master's in education. I have a law degree. I've litigated at the Supreme Court. Like, I have the kind of educational background that they view as in a possessory way. Like, I should be one of them. I should think like them. I should agree with them. And the fact that I don't makes them very angry. So I must be irrational. If I was not irrational, then that would be somehow damaging to their worldview. So I get lightning rodded for that reason.
So Sitch, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, what was the
Sitch,
case you were in the Supreme Court for?
Oh, that was awesome. Yeah, this was back when I was a pretty young lawyer, but I was at my old firm. We were doing a pro bono case. It was really interesting. It was basically the FBI had been weaponizing the no-fly list to try to force people to engage in kind of covert observation / espionage against their religious communities. So they would approach primarily Muslim men and say, if you don't go and then tell us who's saying what. When when you go to your religious observations, then we're going to put you on the no-fly list. And then when they said no, they in fact did. And the litigation was a little bit technical. We were litigating whether it was possible to sue one of those officers for money in their personal capacity. Say, like, it is unconstitutional what you did. You owe these people money. So that's what went up to the Supreme Court, and we won, which was awesome. So
as opposed to the government, you're suing the individual agents.
Yeah. There's a question in law about whether you're suing someone in their personal capacity or their official capacity. And the question there was, can you sue the FBI agents in their personal capacity for money? Now, they still get indemnified. They get insurance from the government. So they don't technically pay in most cases. But the Supreme Court said, yes, you can, which was a big win.
Wow. Interesting. Okay. And so what law, do you still practice law or?
Yeah.
What's your area?
I have a baby YouTube channel, and if anyone wants to hear me talk more, please sub. I appreciate it. But
what's the name of your channel?
I put a link in the title as well, so you can just click on the title.
Yeah,
and get over
Natural Law with Ryan Mullally, Ryan C. Mullally at YouTube and X. But it's small and growing. But yeah, I don't make any money off of YouTube. This is purely a hobby at this point, and I'm a commercial litigator. So I spend most of my time figuring out how companies and high net worth individuals can crush other companies and high net worth individuals. So that's kind of the big law game with New York City.
No, but so what area is that specifically? How do you define that?
It's a wide area. So, that's commercial disputes. Right now I'm doing some judgment enforcement, meaning we have a judgment. We're trying to find out where the money is. I did a big trial in bankruptcy court in April, which was kind of the tail end of the 2008 financial crisis. It's like the last financial crisis case. So, it's a wide variety of different subject matters that come up. And then when you do pro bono cases, you end up doing stuff that's a little bit more, I don't want to say high profile, but lines up more with kind of like the political conversations that we have. Right.
Now I'm curious, because I've always said that I think that people should have been thrown in jail for the housing crisis stuff. Did anyone you think anyone did anything legally wrong, like the banks or the rating agencies?
In 2008?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to have to be very careful in talking about this.
I don't want to get you in trouble.
No. Just because, just to be clear, right. I am an attorney and I have clients, and there are things I just can't say.
Okay.
Right? I think the thing about the financial crisis, and the thing about crises in general that's really, really challenging, is that when you don't regulate the market, it creates booms and busts, and we don't like that. But when you regulate the market, it creates other problems. And so I think if you look at the housing crisis in 2008, there were a bunch of things there were loopholes that were taken advantage of that made that situation as bad as it was. But the fix, like if you try to buy a house today, they're going to ask you for 20% down. And now everyone's saying we can't afford a house. It's like, well, yeah, you can't afford a house, because now no bank would ever give you a mortgage without 20% down minimum. And that does create an affordability crisis. So we're constantly in this cycle of trying to let the market do what it wants to do and trying to prevent it from doing what it wants to do. And they both cause problems.
Interesting. Okay, well, it's good, because I feel like too many times we talk to people who are either, if you have like a hands-off approach, then you will have a shining utopia. There'll be no problems in the markets whatsoever. Or we talk to people the exact opposite, where it's just like everything will just be a complete disaster. It's very rare there's a person like, yes, there's some kind of trade-off where there's going to be pros and cons to both situations.
It's all trade-offs. And I'm not somebody who thinks that having booms and bust cycles in the economy is a bad thing. To be clear, back in 2007, 2008, I was teaching. I hadn't gone to law school yet. And, I was investing in a 401k type retirement plan, because that was part of my comp package, right? I wasn't paying attention to the market. It was on auto debit. The money I invested in those 2 years is the most valuable asset I have today, right? Because they were buying when the market crashed, and when the market came back up, you got a 6x return.
Right.
So like these cycles are very painful in the moment, but are actually very useful for like a long-term investor or a pension fund, etc. Like you said, it's trade-offs. Like,
Right.
if you try to control the market, you end up with secondary problems, and you just have to decide which trade-offs you can live with.
Yeah. Well, I guess it'd be useful if you were young or middle aged in 2008. Then it's great. If you were old, then
It was
maybe
terrible.
not.
Yeah.
You'd be in trouble.
Well, but this is the best example of this is Social Security, right? Like,
Right.
why is Social Security such a nightmare? Why doesn't it work? And for those of you who don't know, Social Security is like the worst possible way to save for retirement. They take money from you today and they give it to seniors today. They don't invest it. There is no return, right? Which is why it's running out of money, because it's a retirement plan that doesn't make any time value of money.
It's not an inflation plan though. It's it's not a retirement plan or an investment plan. It's a inflation management plan. That's the reason why it works. Obviously, you're taking spending power away from young people who could go out there and drive up inflation, and giving it to older people to spend. So,
well, it's not even it works. I think would be a generous description of it. Like, I think that it doesn't work. It's running out of money.
And the reason
it's running out of money is exactly what I just said. It doesn't
well,
actually
the running out of
invest.
money thing, I think, is not really relevant. You know how inflation's caused, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Too much money chasing too few goods. So if you're taking spending power away from workers and giving it to other workers, you're basically managing that inflation risk. So that's the real purpose of Social Security, not it's like an inflation management program. But
I disagree, because the thing
well,
is,
look, I figured you probably would disagree because you conceptualize it as a retirement program, which is completely different
you're taking
than I
the money from
conceptualize it.
workers and you're giving it to seniors, but seniors aren't saving; they're spending. So if the money was going to workers, it would be not spent on inflationary goods. It would be saved or spent on assets. What you're doing is you're taking money from workers and giving it to seniors who are going to be spending it on goods and services like food and rent and stuff like that, because that's what the program's for. So you're actually increasing the amount of money chasing those goods and services in the economy rather than decreasing it.
No, because you're moving the money from one person to another. So which is something you complained about. So there's a set amount of money chasing those goods and services.
Okay, so then how does it reduce?
Anyway, we're getting super in the weeds here.
Yeah, super in the weeds. It's okay.
Sitch, do you want to talk about natural law, or your channel's called Natural Law? Other people ask us about that. I'm curious about it. Natural law comes up from time to time on our channel. So.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we disagree with the whole idea of natural law. So.
Yeah. What does that mean?
I mean, we think it's a good concept, but I don't know that we agree that it actually exists. So go ahead.
So natural law is the idea that there are moral rights and duties, that there's objective moral obligations, right, that exist. And that we as humans are attempting to discover what those are and live up to them. And that basically it's not dependent on us. Like these obligations and these rights would exist no matter what we thought about them. And in fact, even when people were disregarding them, they existed. It's just that people were wrong. And as a result, people can do things that are objectively immoral. People can do things that are contrary to natural law. But when they do so, they're behaving incorrectly. And this was a very common belief at the founding, and in fact was written into the Declaration of Independence as the justification for America's existence as a nation. So if you read the Declaration, it says that the reason that a government should exist is to secure the natural rights of its citizens. That's the purpose of government, is to secure these rights. So I talk about it a lot on the channel because it's essentially the founding moral proposition of America. It's what our country was designed to do. It's why we told England to kick rocks. They were violating natural law, and we were going to do a better job.
Now, does this exist outside the framework of a god, of a religion?
It could. It typically doesn't. It could.
Right. Because if
Does
you
it
talk
for
about
you?
God, well,
Does
if
it
you
for
talk
you?
about God,
Okay.
then obviously I think most people understand that, yes, if there's a God that created the universe, then that God would create a set of natural moral rules. But how do we get there without a God?
It's very challenging. And I think this is part of the moral divide in the country right now, is that the left in particular is increasingly secular and the right isn't. And the concept of natural law, as you well put it, is intuitive to anyone who's Christian or Jewish.
Mhm.
It's kind of core to the concept. Um, I'm a deist, which is a different religious belief, but we don't need to get into that right away. Though we can get into it later. If you don't believe in God, then you would need to reach it through some other philosophic inquiry. I've heard a few. I'm not vouching for them. I'm not sure if they work or not, but one you could view it like Platonic forms. Like if you read like Greek philosophy, they believe that there were abstract objects that existed. So the natural law could be like a feature of the universe. You can't see it, you can't touch it, but like the laws of logic, you can reach it through through your explorations, your intuitions, your rational inquiries. That would be one way of doing it. It could be you could view it as like a set of human universals. Like these are things that are just intrinsically true about humans, regardless of culture, regardless of individual differences. These are just the core, what it means to be a human is this, and you could view it as a product of evolution in that way. I don't know if these arguments work because they're not my position, so I haven't really fully vetted them. But that's how I've seen people attempt to do it without relying on God. But I would agree it's quite a lot more complicated.
Yeah. Well, so I'm a theist, so it's interesting you're a deist, which I guess, yeah, the difference would be I believe that not only God exists, but that God has influence on reality, and you don't believe you believe God created the universe and then step back, right?
I would agree that's the typical deist definition. We actually might be very similar because I've been described as more of a bare theist. Like I believe in God and then I'm agnostic beyond that point. So if somebody says there's a specific claim of a miracle, there's a specific claim of revelation, there's a specific holy book that says X, Y, and Z, I don't know that I have the capacity to evaluate the truth of those claims unless I was there or saw it in some way. So I'm not. I don't know whether or not God continues to influence the world going forward. I'm open to the possibility, but I just don't know that it's been demonstrated to me. So I remain agnostic in that regard.
Do you talk about how you've come to this belief system?
Yeah. So are you asking about belief in God specifically?
Yeah,
or just
about
like,
your
natural law
deist
concept?
belief, I should say.
So with deism grew out of realizing that I believed in God. And the way that came about is that I was a philosophy student in undergrad. So I learned all the formal arguments in religious philosophy for the existence of God. And they're actually, for those interested, they're pretty good. They're actually very well developed. But a lot of people, like a lot of people, I discounted them because they don't really prove Christianity. They just prove a more nebulous God at most. So I kind of set them aside because that wasn't really of interest to me. And then I had a number of religious experiences, which I think people have over their lives, especially people who believe. And years and years later, as with a lot of people, I had my first child when my daughter was born, and I was trying to figure out how to teach her that honesty is good and lying is bad. Like how was she was 2 months old, but I was thinking about it. And I was thinking, not it's bad to be caught lying. Not it's better to be, it's good that people view you as a truthful person, but that one is actually right and the other is actually wrong. How do you teach that? And that kind of set me down a path of inquiry. I was like, well, if there really are things that are right and wrong, what does that mean? And as I stumbled upon what's called Scottish common sense moral realism, which was the philosophy that was very popular with our founders, and it resonated with me. And This kind of eventually led to deism and adopting the Scottish common moral sense, the Scottish moral realism as kind of a philosophic view. And here we are.
Interesting.
I
Okay.
have
Yeah,
you
you go
want to
ahead.
keep going? I have
No,
a bunch
no,
of so the contention that we usually have is over how, like, morality.
Mhm.
So do these laws touch on morality? You talk about them from a moral sense. I think you use the word moral.
Yeah, they're absolutely moral. So like, and this is an important point. Like if you look at the Declaration of Independence, it says that we're imbued by our Creator with certain natural rights, amongst them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness,
Right.
and and the government is there to secure these rights. Now, what does it mean? What does that mean? It's saying that these are higher moral callings than the government itself. Like, you have a constitutional right, that's a legal right, and that's a great thing. But your moral rights are even a higher calling than what the government provides you, and those don't come from the government critically. They're something that they're the standard against which the government is judged. Is the government
but
doing
you
a good
said the
job?
government was in charge of securing those rights.
Yeah, but so the danger in like a really secular worldview, you might say, well, what are rights? Rights are the things that the government gives you, right?
Mhm.
But then what if the government stops giving you those rights? What if somebody comes in and they say, hey, we have a big voting block. We're going to amend the Constitution. We're going to get rid of free speech. We're doing it legally, totally
Right.
legal. We have a big enough voting block. Why is that a bad thing? Why is it bad if we can use democracy to get rid of free speech? Why shouldn't we do that? And in order to answer that question, you have to have some kind of moral framework about what right and wrong is, that isn't limited to just saying, well, it's good if it's legal, it's bad if it's illegal, right? Like, there has to be something higher than just legality. Otherwise, you're conflating legality and morality, and that can be a very dangerous thing. That's what happened in Soviet Russia, where the state was the source of your rights, so the state can, of course, take them away. Why not?
Well, I think these arguments are very persuasive. I see them as sort of an enforcement mechanism of the laws. I generally split it up into two different categories. There is the law itself, and then there is how do you enforce the law. And I think saying that the laws are naturally ordained by God is a great enforcement mechanism, because who wants to mess with God, right? But
No,
in
I'm not
reality,
saying.
hold on, just let me finish. In reality, I think the laws that we have are the laws that we fight for as a society. And if people do subjugate other people all the time. And if they don't fight for those laws, it doesn't matter if we stand back and say, oh, these are natural rights. Like, if you're enslaved somewhere, you can say, oh yeah, freedom is a natural right, but you're not necessarily going to get that natural right unless you fight for it. So just also, I wanted to ask you, like, what is the purpose of these natural laws in your worldview?
Yeah. So when I say natural law, one of the misnomers is natural law is not a legal concept. Like, you can't go to court and enforce natural law. It's not saying what the law is, it's saying what the law ought to be, right?
Okay.
It's a claim about what's moral and what's immoral. And this matters because, again, let's say that there was a voting block, like the Nick Fuentes voting block, and he gets to 80% of the US population, and they vote to reinstate slavery.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Well, if you're a moral subjectivist, if you believe that morality is just a question of like what society believes as a whole, your society as a whole, in this hypothetical, believes that slavery should be reinstated. That's what they voted for. They voted for it 80% to 20%. So the question then becomes like, how could you say that they're wrong? And for me, the answer is slavery violates natural law. It is immoral regardless of how many people like it. It's regardless of what people think about it. It is immoral because it conflicts with a moral duty that we have, and moral rights that we have. And that's very different than saying that what's moral and immoral is just a question of what society says is moral and immoral, which is a constantly moving standard.
Well, like I said, this argumentation I believe in. I think it's good. I think it's persuasive for people. I don't think it's a true property of the universe. I do think slavery is wrong, and I do think slavery is bad for society. It's hard for me to imagine a society where everyone had the right to vote, that they would vote 80% in favor of slavery, unless, of course, they were voting to enslave the 20% that were voting against it, which I could definitely see happening.
Almost certainly.
So obviously we have to fight those sorts of situations, and we do through legal means. But let's just say one of the laws is slavery is illegal. One person can't own another person. What is the purpose of the law? There's free speech. All of these laws, free speech is a law here. You're able to own firearms. That's a law here. Second Amendment. What is the purpose of those laws in aggregate?
Yeah, so under the natural law framework, you would say, well, humans are imbued with certain natural rights: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, the right to own property. There's a small basket of these natural rights that we've kind of figured out over time. I would say the right to be treated as an individual rather than as a member of a collective. These are, there's not a ton of them, but they're moral obligations. So then, when you look at the government, you would say, is the government maximizing or at least seeking to maximize our natural rights? Or are they cramming down on them unnecessarily, infringing on them unnecessarily? Slavery is a brutal imposition on liberty. It's a brutal imposition on the pursuit of happiness. So it's a crushing abolition of those rights. So it would be contrary to natural law, which took it took our country hundreds of years to figure that out. So it was a tough lesson to learn historically, but I think it's a clear one now. And that's why you could say slavery is wrong, even if a society says it's right. And can I ask you, just backing out of this?
Well, I
just ask you. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, so happiness is the purpose of the laws. The laws exist.
Pursuit of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness.
So to provide life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That's the purpose of the law. So any law that came into conflict with that objective would be immoral or not a natural law.
So if you're a pure natural rights enthusiast, like if you take this absolutely to its logical limit, you end up an ANCAP or an anarcho-objectivist, because the government by its nature infringes on these rights, on natural rights. Sorry. It must, like that. That's kind of what government does.
Oh,
so you're necessarily in a compromised position. Like, to have a government that's strong enough to repel invaders with a military and protect your life, you also have a government that's strong enough to risk your liberty because they have this military force that could be used against you. So, like, at a core level, there are trade-offs involved, and I don't think we can avoid those trade-offs. I think the government is always going to be a necessary evil, but what you want to do is minimize the infringement. So, you want the government to infringe on your natural rights to a tolerable extent, let's say. And you would then be correct in saying the government's infringing too much. We should have them infringe less. That would be, to me, be a compelling argument. And the counter argument is, well, if we stop infringing to the extent that you want, it's going to have some catastrophic impact on your other rights. Like, for example, if we have a government that's not strong enough to have a military, your right to life is probably going to be screwed up pretty bad when Canada invades us, or when we get subjugated by Russia, or whatever happens next. So I think those trade-offs are part of the equation. And Thomas Jefferson even wrote about that in the Declaration of Independence, where when he's writing about to England, he was saying, the mere fact that there's infringement would not be enough to justify rebellion. There has to be some kind of gross infringement over a long period of time, at which point the people have the right to destroy the government and put another one in place. And that's why we were right to rebel against England, whereas just a kind of like a minor infringement of natural rights wouldn't have been sufficient.
And when you're weighing the trade-offs between selecting one law over another, your ultimate goal is maximizing liberty, freedom, pursuit of happiness, the things that you laid out. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think
we're pretty much.
that's kind of the American proposition. That's what we were founded to do. That we believe in these rights, and we want a government that's going to maximize our ability to enjoy them.
Right. Yeah. Well, a lot of people don't really see it that way. They think any sort of law, any sort of government is infringing on their liberty. So I agree with you. It sounds like we're in complete agreement that you're really trying to maximize, you're trying to get a set of laws that maximizes society's ability to thrive, to be the least imposition on individuality and individual freedom, and still have a cohesive society.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that this is an important distinction from some of the philosophies that you see, particularly on like the modern left, where they'll say something like, the goal of government is to maximize is to reduce harm, might be a way that they phrase it. Or it might be to promote people's ability to do specific things. Like the goal of the government is to ensure your right to travel, ensure that you have an education, ensure that you have access to X, Y, and Z goods and services. And that's a very different way of looking at the government, right? Because you're not balancing liberty interests, and you're not balancing, you're not attempting to minimize the extent to which the government is infringing on you. You're actually seeking to maximize the amount the government infringes upon you to secure specific policy outcomes. So it does change the way you view the government when you view it through this lens.
One more question, and then I'll let Sitch take over. So are these laws a property of the universe? I think Sitch kind of touched on this, but I wasn't real clear on your answer.
I would say yes, because I believe in God. So to me, I take the words in the Declaration literally. We were imbued by our Creator with certain natural rights. So these rights reflect our relationship with God. But if you're somebody who doesn't believe in God, you might conceptualize them as a feature of the universe. Like you might say the laws of mathematics or the laws of physics or the laws of logic are features of the universe. Similarly, natural law, moral law is a feature of the universe, would be another way of conceptualizing it.
I have a completely different way of kind of conceptualizing morality through an evolutionary lens. So it doesn't necessarily lend to that property of the universe type situation. I mean, it is a property of the universe, but I think it's more of an emergent property than like a fact-based claim. Sitch, you want to jump in?
Well, did you want to explain your system?
I mean, I can't.
No? I don't know.
I know our audience has heard it like a million times, so.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I was curious, Ryan, how did you said you were on the left, and now you're kind of went to the center and you moved a little bit more to the right, because the philosophy that you're laying out, like, is this recent? Because it's hard for me to conceptualize someone who believes what you're believing would ever identify as on the left.
Yeah, so this is it's a really fair question. So I was on the left my whole life, but I would say I was very vibesy. Like I grew up in a family that was kind of like blue dog through and through. And I didn't really examine those beliefs particularly carefully. I thought I was thoughtful, but I didn't really pay a lot of attention to it the way that I probably should have. And I did. I think I did all the things that you were supposed to do. Like I went to teach. I went to Teach for America. I was specifically teaching underprivileged Black kids because I wanted to do some kind of work to remedy inequities in society, and that's what I was doing with my career. And then I decided to go to law school, and I went to law school in 2013, and a few things happened at the same time. The first was I was exposed not to the caricature of right-leaning thought, but the actual people who were thought leaders on the right. So I read Scalia, right? I was reading I read Thomas. I read people who actually had a rational and articulate version of right-leaning philosophy that they could explain. And I had never heard this before. This seemed like secret knowledge to me. So this was very appealing to me because I do have some because I'm temperamentally conservative. Mm-hmm. And then the left went totally fucking insane. So those two things happen simultaneously, and that kind of, in aggregate, led me to re-examine my beliefs, and that didn't crystallize until 2020 because I voted for Biden, and I didn't really want to, but I felt like I had to because I had to vote against Trump. And I kind of swore I'd never do that again. And I need to take stock of what I believe and be a little bit more thoughtful going forward. Um, and then I, started talking on the internet, and I thought, oh my goodness, I've learned all this stuff about conservative philosophy and constitutional originalism, and it turns out there's some really good ideas there. This is stuff that I think people on the left might be receptive to if I could just explain it correctly. And nope, hell fucking no. You are persona non grata. You are off the team the second you mention this stuff. So whereas I thought that I would maybe be able to build bridges between the left and the right on some of these core, what I view as core American philosophic principles, it turns out the left really is very clear about their desire to abandon these principles, which has kind of pushed me over time out of the centrist position and into the more right-leaning position.
Yeah, it's funny because I strongly believe that we all exist mostly in the politics vibe camp for most of our lives, and then the few of us, the few enlightened individuals like yourself, will break free somehow from the matrix and be like, okay, maybe I need to question the vibes here and actually figure out what's going on. And I do think that with sort of like the emergence of wokeness and 2015 and everything, 2015, 2016, that was like a cold shock for a lot of people to question what exactly it is that they were supporting or believing. Because yeah, a lot of people, there's like, hey, I like to help people. That's good. I don't want to be bigoted towards people. That's good. And that was kind of what people thought it just meant to be on the left. And I think for a lot of people, that is what it just meant to be on the left, was to be just like, oh, I'm just a nice, compassionate person. But with the originalism thing that's kind of interesting to me is when the way that I look at it is I understand if we're going to go use a Game of Thrones example, I understand the Ned Starkian idea of the importance of having a code of honor or a set of laws that were set out that you stick to, because people are so easy. It's so easy for people to rationalize whatever they want. It's so easy for people to convince themselves that whatever course helps them or that they want to do is actually the course that is the legal course or the moral course or whatever. And the whole point in my mind of like these codes of honor or morals or laws is to check that, is to say, well, no, hold on. You don't know if you're actually right. Here's this system of laws that you have to follow these procedures to make sure that you're doing things the right way. Kind of the same way, the scientific method in theory is supposed to prevent researchers from letting their bias, taint their work. But whenever I hear people criticize that sort of ideology, especially legally, it always seems like there's a cynicism or there's a cynical aspect where they don't believe, especially on the left, they don't believe that when people on the right bring this up or people in the center bring this up, they don't believe that that's actually what's going on. They believe what's actually going on is this person just doesn't want to implement certain societal changes. And so they're using originalism or they're using textualism or whatever the word would be in order to prevent positive changes from occurring in society.
Yeah, that is very common. And it's when people refer to like the liberal hive mind, this is kind of what they mean, right? Because on the left, there's this view that if you were really rational and really educated and really informed, you would come to the one true opinion on the issue of the day, right? Now, what's interesting about that is that they don't believe in objective morality, generally speaking. They don't believe in natural law. They don't believe in any form of objective morality. So the one true opinion is actually subjective because they don't think there's objective truth to learn. Bracketing that inconsistency, you should have the one true opinion. And if you don't have the one true opinion, it must be because you are irrational, uninformed, or insincere, grifting, basically, right? not to I feel weird talking about myself this way, but it is difficult to describe me as uninformed or irrational. Therefore, I must be grifting. Right. And
Right.
that's kind of how it goes. So they're not interested in hearing the argument for originalism. They're interested in the political outcome. And then
Right.
therefore they assume that you must have your motivation must be impure in some way because you are resisting the political outcome. And that seems to be how they approach it. The irony, of course, is that constitutional originalism is actually a defense mechanism against people trying to screw with the structure of our country without adequate democratic imprimatur. Like think about the way we got gay marriage in the country. And I'm not taking any position on whether we should or should not have gay marriage. But you could have, if you had sufficient political will, you could have passed a law that made gay marriage legal across the country, right?
Mm-hmm.
You did, or if you had even more political will, you could have amended the Constitution. But there wasn't adequate political will to do either of those things. Instead, they went to court and asked judges to essentially amend the Constitution to include gay marriage. But that should strike you as a anti-democratic thing to do. Like, why are 9 judges going to decide that this right suddenly exists in the Constitution that was never thought to exist there previously, when the people are unwilling to even pass a law to that effect?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's the role of originalism. It's meant to limit judges from rewriting the Constitution absent an actual constitutional amendment.
Is gay marriage a natural right?
I don't know. It's a good question. I think that the thing about
why wouldn't it be?
The thing about natural laws, to me, is that you have to be really humble about it. Like one of the great difficulties of being like a deist or a bare theist is that you don't have scripture to rely on. So when people, like, a lot of the time, I don't know the answer, and I think the only way to figure it out is to kind of like have the discussions and sometimes just go through the historical exercise, see what happens. Like right now, we're testing it out. We're seeing whether societies function well with gay marriage. And so far, the answer seems to be largely yes. It seems to be working out fairly well, but there's growing societal discontent in some sectors on that topic now. So I guess we'll see how it plays out. I don't think I know the answer.
If there was something that you believe was part of natural law that was illegal, would you support the courts advocating for it? Or would you say, no, they still have to follow the proper process?
No, I don't think courts can rule on the basis of natural law. I think judges have to rule on the basis of positive law.
Right.
Because like the judges interpret the Constitution. They interpret the statutes. They're not there to be high priests. They're not there to impose their personal beliefs, no matter how
hopefully
wonderful and noble those beliefs are, through judicial fiat. That's not their role.
Well, I think you were correct when you talked about it being outcome dependent for a lot of people. And I think most people, unfortunately, view politics purely as outcome dependent. I think there's a little bit more people that do it on the left than the right, because I don't know if you're familiar with Haidt and moral foundation theory or anything like that.
Deeply, yeah. I
love
that
that
book.
So because the right, they care about the sanctity of things, so they can care about the sanctity of the law and traditions and all these things. And obviously people on the left don't generally care about that at all. They just care about the fairness and harm that is being created by an action. So that's going to lead people to be more, I would say, morally favorable to just being strictly outcome dependent, especially in terms of the gay marriage or any sort of conversation like that. Though I would say, well, my understanding, I haven't really done any deep research on it, but my understanding about the gay marriage ruling was that it was a form of sex discrimination to prevent gay people from getting married, which to me, I mean, that makes logical sense. I don't see why that would be a violation of, I mean, I guess I would see it's a violation of, if you're going to take the originalist interpretation of the text, which, correct me if I'm wrong, means that you interpret the law and how the people that you're supposed to try to interpret the law in terms of how the people meant it when they wrote it. even if there's some sort of unintended consequence or issue underlying it. Because I would say, well, yeah, it is a form of sex discrimination. If you say sex discrimination is illegal, even if they didn't intend it at the time, that would also apply to gay people trying to get married.
Yeah, so I think that the way you said it pretty well. Originalism really just means if that the original public meaning of a phrase, to the extent we can learn it, because you can't always know how it was understood back then, but to the extent you can know, controls, right? And this is not like a weird concept. This is just this is the way you read any legal document. Like, could you imagine if you and Adam signed like a partnership agreement about your YouTube channel? And then like 20 years later, some judge was like, look, when you said that you were splitting it 50-50, sure, like at the time you meant 50-50, but in light of the evolving norms of a changing society, doesn't 50-50 mean 80-20 in Adam's favor? You'd be
I
like,
like this new society.
yeah, Adam's excited about it, but like clearly that's not what you guys meant when you wrote 50-50. And clearly, when you're interpreting a legal document, you should give the terms the meaning they had when it was written, because that's what it meant, right? You don't just like magically evolve the meaning of the terms based on what people think today. So, like a very clear example of this would be like, some judges tie themselves in knots, but the question is like, does the Eighth Amendment, which bars cruel and unusual punishment, does that make the death penalty unconstitutional? You could have some philosophic inquiry about what is cruel and what is unusual and what are the evolving norms of our society and is it cruel and unusual today? But an originalist would just ask the very basic question, which is, when the people who wrote those words, what did they mean? What was society like? Well, the death penalty was the penalty for most crimes immediately prior to them writing it, and it was the penalty for most crimes immediately after them writing it. So whatever they meant by that phrase, it could not have possibly meant that the death penalty was unconstitutional. Now,
Right.
that doesn't mean that we need to have the death penalty. Go pass a law, right? The Constitution isn't the only law in the country. Go pass a law that says there'll be no death penalty, and then there'll be no death penalty, right? Like you don't have to bypass the democratic process. If you want to change the laws, get a body of people together and go vote.
Mm-hmm. Don't we get to a problem though, like I believe that with the sex discrimination amendment, that the person who pushed for it to be added to the Civil Rights Act and stuff like that, their intention for pushing for this was actually to get people to not vote for it. So their intention was actually negative. It wasn't even to grant women or people equal rights on the basis of their sex. So isn't that kind of make it difficult if we're supposed to rely on people's intentions or meanings at the time of drafting of this law?
No, not particularly, right? Like, I mean, like we had the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which is I think what you're referring to, like equal protection under law, like the end of slavery, like these different provisions were added to the Constitution following this, the Civil War, and you could make the argument that they could be interpreted to mean that, for example, women must have the right to vote. But of course, we then later passed a different constitutional amendment giving women the right to vote, which is the perfect example of the solution to the problem, which is instead of having judges decide that the text means something it never meant. And by the way, that is the least democratic possible way to change society. To have 9 unelected judges simply rule that the Constitution mandates something it never said, and society must reshape itself around it as a result. A better way to solve these problems is to do it through democracy. And the women got the right to vote, not because judges said so, but because the people said so. And I think that's a better way of doing it.
But which I understand, but what I mean is like, so in 1964 with the Civil Rights Act, the person who added, like originally it wasn't about sex discrimination, it was just race, religion, color. And they only added sex to that because they wanted people to vote against the bill, and then they voted in favor anyway. So doesn't that pose a problem when we're talking about like original intentions of these legislation?
I think that, well, there you're going to run into a few different things. It's first, that's a statute, not the Constitution. So constitutional originalism has uncertain application because you're in statutory interpretation, not constitutional interpretation, because the Civil Rights Act is a different thing. But it's a statute, not a law, not constitutional. But then the second issue there is, and I think this is a common misunderstanding. The question is not the person's intent. The question is how it was publicly understood. And this is a very important distinction because you could endlessly navel gaze about what individual Congress people thought, right? Like I could, and truthfully, when you do this, it's often very self-serving, right? Like if someone asked me, like, what did Thomas Jefferson think when he wrote the Declaration? I could try to channel the spirit of Thomas Jefferson, and it turns out every time Thomas Jefferson agrees with me. Who would have thought? Right? You know, because it's kind of a silly inquiry on some level. The correct inquiry is, what was this term understood by the population to mean at the time it was enacted? And you look to more extrinsic evidence rather than evidence of subjective intent.
So is it worth, like, let's say hypothetically, the courts they ruled against gay marriage on this basis, for saying, well, when they passed the Civil Rights Act or whatever, you know, obviously they didn't mean to include gay people or discrimination against gays in this. So we're going to say, no, you have to pass a different law. And, you know, so that case fails. And let's just say hypothetically, it takes, I don't know, 50 more years for Congress to pass a law that grants gay people the right to get married. Is it worth basically the harm that it does to all the gay people that can't get married and to society as a whole, just to protect this idea, this principle?
I think the evidence points to yes. If you look at Roe v. Wade, right, there was a vigorous debate about the legality of abortion and what the limits around abortion should be. And people have never agreed on abortion, right? Like they just never have. It's been a hot bone of contention forever. It was decided not by democracy, but by the courts. And people, you know, celebrated, said, oh, this issue is finally put to bed. It was not put to bed. What that turned into was, you know, if the courts were allowed to rewrite the Constitution on what appeared to be a political basis to accomplish a political end, then that then motivated the right to spend 50 years on a hell-bent pursuit of creating a court that would undo Roe v. Wade, right? So now 50 years later, Roe v. Wade is gone, and the political conversation is starting again, and we're seeing states trying different things. Some states have really draconian bans. Some states allow abortion in almost any circumstances, and the political dialogue has restarted, but we lost 50 years of time in trying to figure this out. So we're 50 years further behind in our understanding than we could have been. So I don't know that it works well to end around the democratic process. Now, the truth with gay marriage is I think the Overton window has shifted. This is just my personal belief, not a legal belief. I think that if the constitutional right to gay marriage was undone, you might see one or two states mess with it, but I think there actually has, by and large, there's some amount of societal consensus on this issue, but I could be wrong. Ditto, like interracial marriage. I don't think that I can't really imagine that a state would ban interracial marriage if they were allowed to at this point. That strikes me as highly improbable. But you know, you never know. Like certainly, when these things get undone, it is possible that some state has a legislature that wants to try something that they weren't allowed to do. And we, you know, if any of these things get overturned, I suppose we'll find out. But gay marriage was on the way to becoming the law of the land at the time. It had a lot of political momentum. I don't remember the exact number, but it was like, I think it was 30 plus states had already acknowledged gay marriage at the time the court ruled. I don't quite remember the number.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people, you know, they use the courts to offload politically contentious issues they don't really want to vote against or for. So I'm sure that's what happened with gay marriage.
But here's a better question, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can do this test with any of these controversial Supreme Court decisions. On what basis ask people, like, why did the court say there was gay marriage? Like, what in the Constitution dictates that gay marriage is a right? What in the Constitution dictate that abortion was a right? What is the basis for these decisions? And 99 times out of 100, unless you're talking to a lawyer, the person you're talking to has no idea. They're not going to point you to some clause in the Constitution that actually led to this conclusion. And the reason they don't is what you said earlier. They're outcome determinative. They don't care. They don't care about the legal reasoning. They want the outcome. But if you don't care about the legal reasoning, you probably shouldn't have a strong view on how the court reached its conclusions.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would say with the gay marriage thing, even though I support gay marriage, and I don't really have a problem with the way that the ruling was. I do acknowledge that I would imagine that in 1964, that was not the thought process of anyone when they were passing the Civil Rights Act. But I don't know. I wouldn't agree, though, with interracial marriage. I would assume that when we were passing legislation and amendments to not discriminate against race, that those people would understand that included interracial marriage.
Well, when you're talking about a constitutional issue, it's not even the Civil Rights Act, right? We're talking about the 14th Amendment. So we're going all the way back to like the end of the Civil War Reconstruction era. So, if you're asking the question, do you think the people who passed the 13th and 14th Amendment in the 1800s meant that implied a constitutional right to gay marriage and it was understood to mean that? The answer is obviously no. Like that, there's no question that that's not what was meant by that. I got a story about the Obergefell's, the case that gave the right to gay marriage. When just a personal story, when that case was decided, I was in France and I was in law school. And I remember coming out, and I hadn't read it yet, but I just saw the news story, and I was sitting in a cafe, and I was so proud. This is the profession I was about to join. I was really in favor of gay marriage. I have a lot of friends who couldn't get married, and now they could. And I was just so overjoyed by the outcome. And I felt very proud as a member of this profession. And then the next day, after celebrating, I read the opinion. And the opinion is, legally speaking, one of the worst things that's ever been written. There is nothing in the opinion that even smatters of constitutional reasoning. I have no idea why Justice Kennedy, who wrote the opinion, thinks the Constitution implies a right to gay marriage, other than lofty languages about evolving norms and decency and goodness. It was absolutely written on the basis of his moral views rather than legal views. And then if you read Justice Scalia's dissent, which was one of the formative experiences of my life, his dissent in that case, he wrote, and I'm going to paraphrase because I haven't memorized it, but he said basically the issue of gay marriage does not concern him overly. He doesn't really care one way about the other about the outcome. It's a policy decision. There's good policy, there's bad policy. This might be good, this might be bad. The country survived both good and bad policy. What matters to him is the question of who rules him. In a democracy, who rules him? And he wrote that when the Obergefell was decided, the court ruled that 9 unelected lawyers, rule the country, because they could determine that a right that never existed, that nobody who wrote the Constitution or amended the Constitution thought existed, that nobody prior to this litigation thought was in the Constitution, suddenly was binding and superseded democracy. And this is an important point because people think about constitutional rights like they're a good thing, and they can be. But what they actually are limitations on democracy. They are things that the people cannot decide, no matter how strongly they feel about it. You cannot change a constitutional right without an amendment. There are things you cannot vote for. Your senator cannot vote for. And it should not be the case that 9 unelected judges take things out of the democratic process unless the people told them they could. And that was his problem with it, is that it was deeply, deeply undemocratic. And it was improper for judges to limit democracy in this way. And that's essentially the originalist argument.
So, because my understanding is that was based on the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which, let me bring it up here. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person with jurisdiction the equal protections of the law. So you don't interpret that as meaning that the law can't make these distinctions based on race the way that I guess a lot of judges do when they cite that?
Well, you were doing it on the basis of sexual orientation.
Well, no, I was talking about the interracial marriage case.
Yeah. Well, I want to make sure I'm getting the question.
Well, let me rephrase it. My understanding is that the interracial marriage case was based on the court saying that they interpret what I just read, which is what people call the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, that says that states and the government can't just make these laws that target individuals based on race, right? That was the justification.
Mm-hmm.
And so, well, I guess what I'm asking is, so do you agree in that interpretation of the 14th Amendment, or you don't agree with that interpretation?
Well, it's sorry for being a little pedantic, but there are two different questions that you could ask, and I want to make sure I'm answering correctly. The first question is, as an originalist, do I think the 14th Amendment, setting aside all the law, all the cases that we've had since then, right, should be interpreted that way? And the answer would be no, because nobody at the time the 14th Amendment was passed thought that. It just isn't that's not what the phrase was understood to mean at that time. You could look at the practice in the era, and I think the answer would be pretty clear. But the more salient question today is, if I was on the Supreme Court, would I vote to overturn that decision? And the answer is no, I wouldn't. Because just because there's in the courts, there's something called stare decisis, which basically means that like previous decisions should be respected unless they're egregiously wrong. And that's very important because it creates stability of the law. So like, do I think that's the right interpretation of the Constitution on a blank slate? No. Do I think that it should be overturned just because I disagree with it? Also, no. I think you have to have quite a bit more to warrant something being overturned than just disagreeing.
Would you say the same thing for abortion and gay marriage? If you were like a justice, that is.
Abortion, I think, deserved to be overturned. Gay marriage, I haven't really thought about it. My impulse is no. When you ask whether a case should be overturned, I think I'm trying to boil down the law to make it a little more simple. Right. I think the questions are basically, how wrong was it? Is it just like a little wrong, or is it like egregiously wrong? Did they know they were lying when they wrote it? Like, is this truly, how abhorrent is the legal reasoning? How long has the case been around? Right, is important. And then also, has it resulted in like a useful legal standard that judges can apply, or has it resulted in chaos or judges becoming legislature where they're just enforcing their own policy preferences? And abortion was a nightmare. Like even Ruth Bader Ginsburg thought the original opinion was badly written and didn't make any sense and was unmoored from the Constitution. Nobody thought it was a good decision. And it created an untenable judicial standard where after Casey, the question for the judges was, does this put an undue burden on the right to abortion, any policy? So let's say Texas has a law that says before you get an abortion, you must consult with somebody who shows you a sonogram of the fetus. Is that an undue burden? Well, there's no standard for the judge there. There's nothing in the Constitution about what sonogram, like it's just the judges deciding policy, like a legislature. That's a nightmare. On the flip side, the gay marriage decision doesn't seem to be hard to implement, right? Like you must honor gay marriage. It's very easy for the judges. it doesn't seem to have caused some kind of massive societal decay. And quite frankly, the legal arguments for it, while not particularly good, were a lot better than the Roe v. Wade decision. So that one strikes me as a lot harder to overturn. But if you talk to like there's different originalists in the world, right? Like my buddy Lactoid is more of a Justice Thomas style originalist, and he would easily say that these should be overturned. So there's different views on this sort of thing. But to me, no, I probably don't think that case warrants being overturned, though I haven't like thought deeply about it or read briefs or done any of that stuff. But just on kind of a surface level, no, it seems like it should stick around.
Okay. Adam, do you have any?
Well, in the beginning, I thought you were a little anti-democracy, but now that you've talked a bit longer, it seems like you're fully in favor of democracy. So,
I'm fully in favor of democracy. I'm fully in favor of ordered liberty. My problem is, I don't think that enough Americans understand what these terms mean or why they are what they are. I think that people treat them in this ahistoric way where people will say like, oh, you're in favor of liberty. That means you want everybody to do whatever they want all the time. And it's like, no, that's not what our founders would have understood that term to mean. And in fact, quite the opposite. Like if you don't have a common shared morality, you really can't have liberty. Because if I give you a lot of freedom and you're going to misuse it by doing terrible things, I'm going to have to take some of that freedom away because you keep doing terrible things. In order to have liberty, to maximize liberty, you actually have to have a shared morality.
Well, people always contest this, but the law is a set of rules. It is, and morality, I think, is a set of rules. So, but there are rules that people have imposed on themselves outside of the law. So it's not a perfect one for one. So in the democracy realm, though, what are some of your best arguments in support of democracy?
I think the first one is that it's literally written in the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration writes out a series of like moral propositions that our country was founded on. The first was to secure natural rights. The second was that the government draws its power from the consent of the governed. Now, does that mean direct democracy? No, it does not. And direct democracy is a nightmare at anything other than small scale. Like it only works in tiny, tiny areas. So representational, a constitutional republic, this is a better form of government. And where direct democracy has been tried, like in California, the results have been pretty disastrous, I would say. It turns out to be a pretty bad idea. But that doesn't mean that you're opposed to democracy. It means that you're trying to figure out how to run a constitutional republic, a democracy at the scale of our country. And a lot of people claim to be pro-democracy, but they really mean they're pro their side winning in a democracy. And to me, I think that if you're serious about making a country as big as ours run, you have to take seriously some of our founding ideas. Like, why did we have a limited federal government? We don't have one anymore, by the way. The federal government is unlimited in power. It can do basically anything it wants. It's a nightmare. For our founders would be rolling in their graves if they saw it. But why is that a problem? Well, because in a country of 350 million, it sucks to have 51% of the population vote to beat the other 49% of the population with sticks. That's a shitty thing to do. And it's shitty when it switches every 4 years. It would be better if more power was given to the states so that, in your local communities, you could make decisions and not everything was a national issue. It would solve a lot of our problems. But, we're in a world right now where everything is a national issue. So everything's treated like a national issue. And we're hopelessly divided as a result. But I'm hopeful that maybe we can talk some sense into some people and return our democracy to its proper shape.
So you wouldn't change anything about who votes and the current makeup of the electorate?
If I was the czar of the universe?
Sure. Or do you think it's wrong where it is set now, even just ideologically incorrect? I mean, I only
18 might be too young.
Okay.
I don't think it's too young, like in terms of like humans and being a human, but we've created a society where we coddle a lot of people for a really, really long time. So I'd either like to stop doing that so that the average 18-year-old has had more responsibility and a better understanding of how the world works, or you might need to think about something like, I don't know, like if somebody claims you as a dependent, you can't vote. Like like you have to actually be an independent person in the world on some level who, in order to. But truthfully, I'm not sure that any of those things warrant like a constitutional amendment. My concern is more that.
So it's more important to stick with the Constitution than anything for you. You're coming to your conclusions based on, we have this document and we need to respect the document.
Well, kind of. Let me see if I can back this out. I think it's really important to respect the Constitution, but the Constitution allows for amendment, right? So
Yeah,
amending
obviously.
the Constitution is fair game. That's very, very, very hard to do. We might not see a constitutional amendment for a long time. But if you want to amend the Constitution, then you need to get into questions about what ought we do, which is not a question of what the Constitution currently says, because you could, in theory, amend it to say anything, right? And that's the argument that, in terms of the horseshoe, if you talk to like a extreme communist or some variations of Christian nationalists today, that's the argument they make. They'll say, no, we're not talking about a violent revolution. We're just talking about creating a voting bloc that amends the Constitution to mandate communism or to mandate Christian theocracy or what they're trying to do. It's not a violent revolution. We do it all legally. And then the question is, ought we do that? And to answer that question, you need a moral foundation beyond what the Constitution says. You need some kind of grounding in a moral philosophy.
Okay.
Well,
can I ask you guys a question?
Yeah,
sure.
One of the things that gets debated these days is America a propositional nation? If I asked you guys that question, what would you say?
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, what's a propositional nation? What do you mean?
So most nations were founded as ethnostates.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is Japan? Japan is the place where Japanese people live. What is India? What is Ireland? What is France, right? They were founded around an ethnicity. Some states were founded around a religion and their theocracies, right? I don't, well, let's go there. Do you think America was founded as either an ethnostate or a theocracy?
No.
Yeah. So then what is it? What is America's founding principle? And when I ask, like, is America a propositional nation? That typically means that America was founded not on the basis of an ethnicity or a religion, but on a philosophy, right? Like about some kind of moral proposition that is what it means to be American. That's what we were founded on.
America was founded on being based and being free. That's what happened.
Well, no, I think the
want
principle of individual freedom is probably closer.
You can come to America. All right. That was what it, yeah. So 100% I agree. America was based on or is a propositional nation. And I don't know if you saw, I think it was like last year or something. It was kind of funny. There was this huge blow up where, oh my God, what's his name? Oh, Vivek made basically that argument on X, and all the white nationalists got very mad about that and started attacking him, saying, no, America was an ethno state.
Well, but this is really important, because today, if you talk to a communist, if you talk to a white nationalist, if you talk to like an extreme variation of a Christian nationalist, they're going to say that, America is founded on the principle of basically rule of law, right? So if we can do it legally, then it's fine. The question is just, can we amend the Constitution to make it a theocracy? Can we amend the Constitution to make it an ethnostate? And if we can, then that's fine. My answer to that question is no, you're wrong, because America was founded on a particular philosophy. And what philosophy was that? It's the one written down in the Declaration of Independence, because our founders actually sat down and told England, we aren't part of you anymore. Why aren't we part of you anymore? Well, they couldn't say because we're not English. They couldn't say because we had a different religion. So they had to have a different reason. And Thomas Jefferson literally wrote it down. He wrote down the moral justification for America being a nation. And I don't think that's optional. I think that America was founded on a philosophy. The philosophy was written down. And my problem in a nutshell with the modern left is that they've rejected the philosophy and they want to replace it with their own. And I think that's an illegal chess move. It's like you're playing a game of chess and you're halfway through the game and you just decide the queen has a machine gun and can mow down the other pieces. It's not legal. Like, America is based on this philosophy. You don't get to change it, because if you change it, well, then anybody has the right to change it. Maybe it should be an ethno-state. Maybe it should be a theocracy, right? Like, and that's my meta concern with the left these days, is I think they've rejected the concept of what America is philosophically. And once you do that, you're in dangerous territory, and it's hard to recover from that.
Though, I guess we sort of get into a trouble, though, because it seems like when America was founded, there was a pretty strong disagreement between the people who, were pro-slavery and were more in the ethno-state camp, and the people that were not pro-slavery and were not really in the ethno-state camp. And it seems like a lot of the founding fathers, even if they were against slavery and against ethno-nationalism, they basically said, well, we need to construct a political coalition in order to form a country to fight off the British and to exist. So they were basically willing to sort of allow slavery and do all these things because maybe it benefited them financially, and just because they couldn't really be bothered to do away with it. And that does make it, I say, more difficult from an originalist perspective, that even though I would argue that in all the words that you're talking about that were written by the founding fathers, slavery and ethno-nationalism should not fit in those words in any sort of clean reading. But obviously that's not how it actually happened for the first, X number of years in our country.
Oh, I agree. Though just to say, the one disclaimer, constitutional originalism is a legal theory. It's about how you interpret the Constitution, not a moral theory. So it's not how I would look at this question. But
isn't there a morality attached to why you should even do that in the first place?
I mean, maybe you could derive some kind of morality from it. It's really about, like, how do you read a legal document? How ought judges behave, right? Like, so I guess there's an ought in there, but I'm not doing moral philosophy. I'm doing legal philosophy. It's a jurisprudential question, not a moral philosophy question, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But in terms of the Declaration, the slavery objection is a common one. But if you view natural rights, as I do, as part of our relationship with God, and most people would characterize God as unchanging, the idea isn't that because people said we had slaves and they believed in natural law, that slavery was compatible with natural law. The idea is that they were wrong about what that meant. Just like, Newton had all kinds of ideas about physics. He turned out to be wrong about a lot of them now that we've seen Einstein and quantum mechanics. But that doesn't mean that the laws of physics were wrong. That just meant that Newton, for all his brilliance, was wrong in the way that he understood them at that time. And if you look at our history, like, what was Lincoln quoting when he argued for the abolition of slavery? He was quoting the Declaration of Independence and saying slavery is incompatible with natural law. What was Frederick Douglass quoting? The Declaration of Independence. What was Martin Luther King Jr. quoting? The Declaration of Independence. So the argument has always been slavery was always incompatible with natural law. It just took us a long time to catch up and to societally accept that truth. But it was always true, right? So I don't think it's incompatible to say that just because we haven't lived up to our potential in the past, that we must abandon the philosophy, no more than I would think it would make sense to abandon physics because people today or have an imperfect understanding of physics, and people in the past had an even less perfect understanding of physics.
Right.
We pursue natural law because we ought to, and it's right. And we make mistakes along the way, and we can be wrong without invalidating the concept.
Well, I would agree sort of that slavery was always not compatible with the founding principles that our country was based upon. And I think that is why Lincoln and MLK and everyone would always cite the Declaration of Independence for that purpose, is to show that hypocrisy, that incompatibility. But how, unless the concept of natural law that is being proposed is rooted in some sort of theological text like the Bible that you can point to, how do you make an argument that slavery or anything is not compatible with natural law?
Well, I mean, it doesn't. If you accept natural law, even if you're not referencing the Bible, let's just say you're like me, you're a deist. Mm-hmm. So you have natural law, you have your philosophy, but you can't rely on the text of the Bible because you're not a Christian.
Right.
Well, slavery is a brutal imposition on liberty. It's a brutal imposition on the pursuit of happiness, right? Like, it's a brutal imposition on the statement that all men are created equal. Like, this doesn't take a rocket scientist to see the incompatibility. This is plain as day. It's hard to imagine something less that's more obviously incompatible. And it's like the same reason I have no issue saying that socialism is morally evil from a natural rights perspective, because it entails abolishing huge categories of natural rights. Property rights, the right to pursue happiness, the right to open a business. Like, there's all kinds of things that get abolished in that system that we would view as intrinsic natural rights. So I think when you just literally take the text of the Declaration seriously. When somebody is brutally infringing upon these rights, that is definitionally incompatible.
Well, I guess I wasn't really asked about the Declaration, because I agree on that. But in terms of the natural law perspective of this coming from God or the universe, because it sounds like you're assuming that God cares about freedom, and I guess I'm asking why. How could you make that assumption without pointing to some text?
So I subscribe to my meta-ethical philosophy is called Scottish common sense moral realism. It's the same. Thomas Jefferson believed in it. A lot of our founders believed in it. It was very popular at the time of the founding. And it's often phrased religiously, but it doesn't need to be. What it basically says as a philosophy is that we don't need and shouldn't question things that are so common sense, so core to what it means to be a person, that they are self-evidently true, right? Like, we don't need to question whether we're stuck in the matrix or actually interacting with reality. We can just assume this is reality and build on that foundation. We don't need to question whether we are secretly machines or have, we can assume that we all have the experience of making choices. So we have some semblance of free will. Similarly, if I don't know if you guys are parents, but if you interact with like a 2-year-old, the balance of liberty and security, they won't use those words, but it's on their mind constantly. They want you to keep them safe, and they want you to give them enough freedom that they can experiment and try new things. But if it gets too dangerous, they want you to come in and keep them safe again, even if they're less free in that moment. This is a constant in human experience, that we want the liberty to make choices, but we don't want to be exposed to so much danger that we die as a result of our decisions. We want to be able to make choices, meaningful choices, pursue a life that makes us happy. We want to be able to take ownership of things. Like, if we make a piece of art, we'd like that piece of art to be ours and not confiscated by the state. I don't think these things are difficult to understand as human universals. I think these are absolutely common sense. And it kind of, you have to twist yourselves into knots to doubt them. It's the kind of thing, someone uses the phrase like, you have to be really educated to be that stupid. Like, you have to be really, really educated in philosophy to question whether people value liberty, whether they value safety. Like, of course they do. We all do.
Well, I haven't read any of the Scottish common sense realist philosophers. How you're describing it, I think I would agree with a lot of it, but I guess I don't know how do we draw the distinctions? Because I would say a lot of things I don't think are common sense. Because I think one of the most common sense things in humans, or one of the base level programming genetically or from an evolutionary perspective in humans, is this in group, out group tribalism that we probably had to have to survive being cave people or monkeys or whatever. And it's really the antithesis of individualism. So I'm not sure I would say that individualism would fall into this category at all.
I actually think that that's a really interesting point. This is, I think, one of the big distinctions between the left and the right today. And I think the right, not the Fuentes right, but the reasonable right, has the better take on it, which is if you look at the left, they've gone so far with morality. There's this kind of like a Kantian infused concept where what makes something moral is the intention, not the consequence. So if you do something that's really good, but it's for somebody you love, isn't it less moral because you take pleasure out of their happiness? Right? Wouldn't it be better if you did something for somebody you'd never met? That would be even more moral, right? Because now you get nothing out of it. And I think the more common sense and quite frankly, more Christian perspective is kind of enlightened self-interest. Like, I should care more about my kids than I do you guys. You seem like nice guys, but it is better for me to care about my kids than you because I'm their parent. And I should care more about my community than other communities. And I should care more about my country than other countries. That doesn't mean I have to care zero about other people outside my in group. But when I do something to make, my community better, it is part of my enlightened self-interest. Like, I sacrifice some of my money or time to do something great in my community. And now my life is enriched because my community is better as a result. And that's actually a good thing. I don't think that's contrary to the idea of that we should treat people as individuals. I think that we can understand that we have biases and understand that the government ought not discriminate against people because of their race, that, without saying that we must divorce ourselves from caring about our communities or the people around us.
Well, to me, I think common sense generally comes from three different things. I think it comes from an individual's own moral intuitions. I think it comes from whatever the cultural vibe is about morality is at the time. And I think it comes from learned experiences, either individual or sort of communal. And so to me, like a lot of, when I look back at like, a lot of the prescriptions in Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and all the very religious things, to me, I almost look at it as like the things that they keep advocating for, the reason they have to advocate for them, like do unto others, is because that's not the norm. It actually requires some sort of external force to sort of dictate this morality onto people. And I would think that like the common sense or the normal view of morality would be, okay, if someone from a neighboring tribe wrongs me, they kidnap someone, they kill someone, I have to not just kill them, but I have to kill like their whole family, because if I don't kill their whole family, then they're going to get revenge on me and it's going to create a blood feud and blah, 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 blah. And so I don't know, like to me, I think there has to be something outside the bounds of like what would just be a common sense approach of things.
Yeah, and I think that what and Zero Fox put this in chat, but he's 100% right. What the Scottish common sense moral realists were doing is that they were saying that we don't need to doubt our fundamental axioms. We experience reality. We have free will. We know that some things are right and wrong. There is a moral law that's written on our hearts. We can experience these things. Now, when you start getting into the application, what are the natural rights? How do they apply in a given situation? You're going to have to do a little bit more work, and common sense isn't going to always be your guide there. But you don't have to question, whether or not you're an agent with free will. You don't have to question the existence of moral rights and obligations in natural law. You can assume these things as a fundamental axiom, and not to do like the whole professorial thing.
Right.
This was in response to David Hume, who at that time had injected radical skepticism into Enlightenment philosophy. And so like our founders were rejecting that view that you need to be skeptical of everything.
I see. Okay. So I see. So I'm using, and they're using kind of different definitions of what common sense means. They're really just meaning like understanding you're not some sort of Descartesian demon world, right?
Yeah, you don't have to worry about being in Descartes' demon world. You don't have to worry that you're an automaton without free will, and you don't have to worry that there's no such thing as right and wrong, and that it's all subjective. It's all cultural construction. Like there is such thing as right and wrong. We all know it. We all experience it. We might have to argue about it. It might be hard to figure out what it is, but the fact that there is a fact of the matter isn't really something you need to worry about or dispute.
Well, I guess we can't talk about objective morality without me bringing up my version of this, which I know Adam does not like, which is I think there's two types of objective morality, and I think I call them local and universal. And local means that whoever's created this system of objective morality, they've decided that there's some sort of endpoint, and maybe the endpoint is, human flourishing or thriving, or building a capitalist utopia or whatever. They've decided what the goal is, and that theoretically there should be some objective best way to reach whatever that goal would be. And I think that kind of like local objective morality to me makes more sense, where a universal one is, well, the goal itself of what you're trying to do, that has to be inherently woven into the fabric of reality itself. And it's hard for me to see how you get there without God deeming it so.
Yeah, and of course our founders did take that approach.
They did, of course.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is, are you familiar with Hume's guillotine?
No.
So David Hume famously, like as I was saying earlier, injected a lot of skepticism into philosophy. And one of the things that he said is that you can never derive an ought from an is, right? And what that means is you can never give a description of reality and then come up with a moral prescription merely from that description.
Right.
So what people started doing to solve that in some philosophical circles is what you just described, which is they presuppose an ought, and then they ask, just from that presupposed ought, what other oughts can we derive? So if you say, like, for example, like, if a surgeon wants to save a patient, they ought sterilize their instruments. Right. So it's a localized ought. They've already built the actual ought in. I should save this patient. But if we have that ought, then we can derive other oughts, which is, I think, what you were doing. Our founders rejected that view. This is the Hume view that they were rejecting, because they said that there actually are oughts that are built into the fabric of reality. What are those oughts? Well, all men are created equal. They are endowed by their creator with life, with certain and unalienable rights, natural rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, being amongst them. And because you built those oughts into the fabric of reality, you can then derive what you would call local oughts from those universal oughts. And that's where the common sense realism kicks in. They say, like, those first order oughts, that we ought respect natural law, we ought treat people as if they were created equal, those are woven into the fabric of reality and need not be justified. They're just axiomatically true.
Right. So with the Scottish realists, do they believe in God? Are all these oughts coming from a deity?
Many of them did. It's not strictly speaking necessary. And I don't think true atheism was like a thing back then. So it's certainly like Jefferson was a deist.
Right.
And that's why, the fun fact, when he wrote in the Declaration, he wrote, "We find these truths to be self-evident." The phrase self-evident is a nod to Scottish common sense moral realism, because that's what he's saying. Like, these are axiomatically true. We don't need to justify them. They are self-evident.
Right.
I don't think it's impossible to believe in those things without belief in God, but I think it's a lot more complicated, and it is harder. And I do worry, as America becomes increasingly secular, that we might become increasingly divorced from our founding philosophy, which then begs the question, what the hell's the country? if we're no
Mhm.
longer invested in the American moral proposition.
True. Shintz Ralda for 6 months says, not so erudite. How about not so honorable or oh so irritable? Got him. There you go. It's pretty good.
Well, what's really funny about that is this is the conversation. Like, if not so erudite wanted to actually unpack my philosophical views
Mhm.
rather than attack my political stances, she would have had this conversation with me.
Right.
Because that's 100% what you guys have done, is just ask me questions and see where it goes. That's not at all what she was doing. She was asking a question to then make a sharp political attack, which is a totally different vibe.
Do you think these philosophical arguments are widely persuasive?
No.
Okay, good.
That's
I was like,
the-
I was kind
That's
of
the
drifting.
problem. Yeah.
I was kind of drifting it. I was thinking, wow, does he really think these arguments change the world? Because I mean, maybe they're persuasive to other philosophers, but I think Erudite's strategy of destroying your reputation is far more persuasive to people, right?
I think these are not persuasive. It's a weird one, though. Like, I don't need to convince a religious person that natural law exists. They all already agree with me.
Yeah, but there's
Like,
huge differences over what that natural law is.
Of course, but people have been fighting about what natural law means forever. Like, I'm not going to solve that problem. But in terms of core philosophy, they agree. And the reason they agree is religion is extraordinarily good at creating practical philosophy for people who are not interested in reading philosophy. Like, you can be religious and kind of casually religious and inherit a tradition of philosophy without doing any of the reading yourself.
I think religion is a great enforcement mechanism for whatever the moral rule set is, definitely, because you're using God as some sort of invisible enforcer. But each religion, I mean, they have widely different ideas about what right and wrong is, but especially around questions of punishment. Mostly, that's where you get into problems.
But this is why people say, "Oh, that's just a culture war issue." No, this is why I think the culture war is a very serious issue, because religion is an enforcement mechanism, sure, but it's also a teaching mechanism. You read stories, you learn a moral tradition, you inherit this through your practice and through the people around you. When those stories get replaced by different stories, now you're inheriting a new moral tradition. But who's the author of that moral tradition? It's the 6 wokest people you've ever met in Hollywood. That's not necessarily a good thing. It could be a good thing, but like that is a real fight for about what the moral inheritance we pass to our children is.
The testing of these different moral philosophies, though, is trial and error. Though it's not some sort of philosophical understanding of what's going on here. It's just we try these processes and they fail or not. You admit this when you talk about gay marriage being not impactful on society. When people are saying something shouldn't be tried, they're saying, look, this change has the power to impact society in ways that are going to be detrimental to our thriving. So
yeah, and I think that's the big difference between like a deist and or a bare theist and, like, let's say a Christian, right?
But we didn't come to that solution, though, through philosophical musings. So we came to that solution because we tried gay marriage and realized society didn't fall apart.
What I was getting at is a lot of the work is done by the metric, right? So if you're a Christian, let's say you're like a hardcore Bible Belt Christian, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your metric is how much sin is there in society. And you would say society is falling apart. There's all this sin now that there wasn't before, right? If you're a harm reduction person, you have a different metric and you say, oh, well, it's not causing any harm. So it seems to be working out for the best, right? So a lot of the time, there's these unspoken philosophic assumptions that I don't think the average person is very interested in, but they are applying them.
See,
and this is where Jonathan Haidt's work comes in. Where are their moral foundations? Where are they getting them from? And when they go to university, things like sanctity, things like respect for authority get stripped from their moral foundations, and they end up with a harm reduction model.
You make an interesting point where you point to the level of sin. Okay, so you're going to have different groups have different ideas for where we're at in society, right? Some are going to say society is falling apart. Some are going to say society is just fine, right? But there's a process. This is where the democratic process comes in for polling society on a regular basis to find out how things are going, right? When more people believe society is falling apart, then obviously you get change elections, right? You get new candidates coming in to try new things, to fix things up. But this process, like, it barely touches on philosophy. It's just it's a trial and error process that just keeps chugging along. And look, when we talked about democracy, this is where I would say democracy is important, because democracy is really the only mechanism we have for asking people, hey, how do you think society is going? Do you think it's falling apart, or do you think it's fine? And this is why taking people out of that equation, I don't think is a good thing, because obviously the more people polled in this equation, the better, right?
Well, I agree with you that, like, practically speaking, of course, democracy works the way you described. What I was getting at is that the democratic process rides on the back of philosophy, because when we teach the next generation what to value, we are from like a broader perspective deciding what they're going to vote for, right? So when Haidt talks about people going to university and losing, I don't know if he's up to 7, but when I read his book, it was 5 moral foundations, going from a 5 moral foundation worldview to 2. That means that they're not going to vote on the basis of sanctity or respect for authority or nationalism or tribal interests.
Yeah,
and they're going to vote more predictably for fairness and harm reduction. And they'll say things like, well, like what Louis C.K. once said, where he's like, well, shouldn't we just open the borders and then people will come to the country and it will get worse here, but that's more fair because, now it's more fair for everybody, which is, I think a 2 foundation theory. You're reducing harm, you're being more fair, you don't care about authority, you don't care about the sanctity of the country, you don't care about privileging your in-group over other groups, America over, other countries. But that's a learned worldview. Nobody operates that way naturally. You get taught to operate that way. That's what Haidt revealed in his work. And the question is, ought we teach people to think that way? Or should we have an education system that doesn't do that? And that's kind of one of the big culture war issues today, is like, should we have an education system that is doing what it's currently doing?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that people are taught how to behave and how to think and that kind of stuff. I don't necessarily think it's being done in school as much as it's being done through media and stuff like that. But
I think it can be both.
What the question of whether or not to do it, I mean, it's happening. Players are entering the market and doing it, whether we want it or not. We're not really having some sort of substantive debate over how to structure society. I mean, we kind of are.
Let me ask you this though. I've been talking about, like, the philosophy embedded in the Declaration of Independence, Scottish common sense moral realism, which was, the philosophy of many of our founders, including those who wrote that document. I would almost guarantee that people who aren't regular viewers of mine have never heard of these things before. Right. So my question is, why aren't we, if this is our founding philosophy, and history will prove that it is, why aren't we teaching it?
Well, I don't think it's broadly persuasive. That's why.
Well, I don't think
it's a good one. Well, look, I fundamentally, I don't think it's broadly persuasive. I think that's probably why it's not being taught. So,
but if I asked you about utilitarianism, you would have known what that was.
Utilitarianism, right? Of course, yeah.
Yeah, because they do teach utilitarianism in college.
Right. Yeah. Well, look, yeah. I think utilitarianism is an interesting thing, because I don't think they explain the moral intuitions that people already have. If you have two cities and with a population of 1 million in one city and a population of 2 million in another city, and nuclear missiles headed for both cities, but you can only save one, people intuitively know, save the bigger city, right? Save the 2 million population if you must lose population, right? They intuitively know that. They don't know it because they learned utilitarianism. They know it because saving 2 million people is better than saving 1 million people. So utilitarianism is just kind of a way to define that, a way to explain what they know intuitively.
But then they become utilitarians, and utilitarianism is the most unintuitive philosophy in practice you could imagine. Like if somebody asked me if there was a trolley and I have the option of saving my daughter or 3 strangers of the same age, utilitarianism says I should save the 3 strangers. I can guarantee you that will not happen. I will save my daughter 100 times out of 100 and feel fine about it. Like I am confident that is the right thing for me to do because humans are not utilitarian reasoners. But they can
what is the correct answer
to become utilitarian reasoners.
What is the correct answer in the city situation?
I think utilitarianism does line up with the right answer sometimes.
Okay,
I mean,
in the city situation, you should save the 2 million people.
Yeah, but that's because all things being equal.
Right.
If you ask me, should I save New York City or Istanbul, I'm going to save New York City.
Here's the problem with voting too. Oftentimes people vote. They're voting their interests at the expense of other people's interests, right? So if you have the two cities and everybody in this 3 million people situation has a vote, I guarantee you're going to get 2 million votes for saving the 2 million city and 1 million votes for saving the 1 million city, right?
Yeah, and that's actually that's the reason why direct democracy is a very bad system of government.
But it came to the correct answer, though. It came to the correct answer. It came to your answer
in that instance. But what you're revealing is that direct democracy tends to be short-term biased and tends to prioritize selfish motivations in a way that is probably incorrect.
So okay, let's limit the electorate in this thought experiment. Okay, you got the city with 2 million, you got the city with 1 million. Let's limit the voting population to 10% of the population. We do an election, and it turns out they say save the city with 1 million inhabitants and let the city with 2 million inhabitants die. Did the democratic process come to the right solution?
When I say direct democracy is bad, the direct democracy isn't about who's voting, it's about who's making the decision. Like my problem with direct democracy is when you let people vote on the issue instead of voting on the person who gets to decide the issue.
Okay, so we vote for the person, right? Yeah. And the person's wife lives in city 1 with 1 million inhabitants. He says save the 1 million inhabitants, let the 2 million have it. Did that come to the right conclusion? Did that democratic process come to the right conclusion?
I would say no, but that I don't know. Like any system of government could reach the wrong conclusion in a hypothetical.
Yeah, but in my situation where everyone gets a vote, it reaches the correct conclusion.
Okay, but there's an infinite number of hypotheticals, and I think we could pretty trivially agree that I could come up with a bunch of hypos where that would lead to a bad outcome. Like, for example, in California, where they, through the direct democracy process, voted to amend their constitution so that they no longer had to have escalating property taxes, and as a result, bankrupted their state and went from having the best education system in the country to one of the worst over the course of my lifetime. And both my parents voted for it because they didn't want to pay property taxes. It turns out that if you ask people, would you like to pay less money and get more money? They all vote for it, but it might not be good policy because
look at this guy trying to get my property taxes raised. Are you in California, Ryan?
No. I was born there, but I'm on the East Coast.
Okay.
That's Proposition 13.
Yes, I know. Yes, I'm in California. I know very well. You're trying to get my property taxes raised here. I'm getting very upset.
It's what it is. It's like taught in law school as one of the worst ideas of all time. Like it bankrupted the state. It was a brutal, it was a brutally bad idea, but very, very popular and popular to this day amongst people who have incredibly low property taxes as a result.
We got a bunch of super chats, so I think there's some questions for you as well. Sitch, you still around?
Yeah. No, I left.
Okay.
Joe the Meg for $20. Thanks so much. Joe says, not so erudite, constantly tries to grandstand on her Christian principles, but is never willing to apply said principles to larger society or even her coworker streamer cohort. She wears her Christianity like a skin suit.
Look at that. Fake Christian. I knew it.
There you go. Sam Josh, thanks for the 18 months, says, could you make an intuitive argument for natural rights? What rights exist beyond the ability to enforce said rights?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, and this is I know Andrew Wilson plays in this area quite a lot, but it's based on a little bit of a lexical ambiguity. Natural rights are moral obligations. Legal rights require enforcement. Moral obligations exist whether or not they're enforced. Right? So if you believe in natural law, you believe in objective moral reasoning, you would say, for example, slavery was wrong even when slavery was common. It was still wrong. People just hadn't figured out how to make society better yet. So they're different things. So a legal right, I would agree, doesn't exist absent enforcement. A moral obligation would exist regardless of whether or not society lives up to it.
Gypsy Harlow for $5 says, morality is whoever wins the chimp out. Well, I think we're trying to move away from that.
Try real hard.
Yeah. CF Paffy for $10 says, I don't understand the Social Security ad inflation management thing. Is Adam saying that Social Security spreads a pool of cash to populations chasing different goods? Therefore, the cash goods ratio is kept stable?
Yes, which I answered yes, obviously.
Okay. Camman52 for $10 says, I don't think there's enough talk about ordered liberty, which is the balance of competing rights not only between people, but society at large. Ryan, how does your project of natural law account for that?
That's a great question. And if you're interested in that, you should watch the Ordered Liberty podcast that I participate in every Sunday, because that is exactly the topic of conversation that we try to get to when discussing philosophy, modern politics, and the Federalist Papers, which we do every week. So tune in.
Be honest, cameraman. That was a plant, right? That was an obvious setup that you're throwing around. Right?
My web is spreading.
Yeah. Is this why you're on YouTube? You want to spread these ideas? You want to teach people this philosophy?
Yeah, I think that this might be just egotistical of me, but like after spending a lot of time, I'm in my 40s, a lifetime on philosophy, education, and law, and particularly constitutional and founding principles, that I've realized, at least to some extent, some of what we're lacking. And I don't make any money on social media yet. This is all very new. I'm very thankful for my small and growing community, but this is a hobby for me. Mm-hmm. And my hope is that I would be able to contribute to the conversation by explaining, what our founding philosophy actually is, how it applies today, and what constitutional originalism actually is and why that's a good thing. So hopefully, I can contribute to the discourse in some meaningful way.
A lot of the talks we have about morality is from a kind of technical perspective, just how it works functionally, not necessarily philosophically. What kind of principles it's grounded in, that kind of thing.
I think this is going to become increasingly important because I do believe America was founded on a particular philosophy, and we've failed to replicate it. We don't teach it. We don't demand that our citizens believe in it. We don't actually do anything to enforce it. And as a result, it's slipping away. And as it's slipping away, you're seeing people show up and offering to replace it with something else. That's what the Marxists are doing. That's what an ethno-nationalist is doing. They're offering to replace America's founding philosophy with a different one. And we don't seem to have ideological armor, because we've retreated from our founding philosophy, and now classic liberals have kind of this wishy-washy vibe where they say like, oh yeah, everyone should be allowed to do whatever they want to the extent possible. And it doesn't actually have any heart or teeth. And as a result, we as a society seem vulnerable to hostile ideologies. And I don't think that has to be the case. I think we actually do have a robust founding philosophy that we could teach and would armor us against these hostile ideologies that are infiltrating our discourse and population.
Is it a real threat that America is on the verge of becoming an ethno-state?
I think what the real threat is that the American moral proposition is up for grabs, right? Like if you see this in our politics now, where what are we really talking about? People are saying like, oh my God, Mandami got elected in New York. Why is that a problem? Well, because people are losing a knee jerk that's immoral when socialism comes up. Fuentes is going on Tucker. Why is that an issue? Because people are losing a knee jerk that's wrong when somebody says, I love Hitler, I love Stalin, right? Like they're losing the sense that there's something intrinsically immoral about these positions. And that's because we don't have a grounding philosophy, which if we did, those things would be trivially easy to identify as contrary to our founding philosophy. Well, so I do think this is starting to become an issue, and we're starting to see politics as a pure popularity contest unmoored from our own philosophy, which will have downstream consequences eventually.
Which do you think is more powerful, those social taboos or a broad understanding of the grounding philosophy?
Probably social taboos, but one is downstream of the other.
Right.
Right, like when people
but you're talking about teaching them the upstream thing when the thing that really curbs their behavior is some kind of social taboo.
Yeah, but okay, so like how do social taboos change and get eroded? Well, for example, in law, we had critical theory, which then became critical race theory, and then became critical gender theory and critical queer theory, etc. And those are now being taught, and those viewpoints have the express goals of changing taboos and social norms. Without taking a position on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's all downstream of a very particular philosophy that got enacted into various curriculums, that got enacted into various campuses, that now shape the way people think. So ideas, culture is often downstream of ideas. It's just that the connection. I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's both.
That's a great point in the critical race theory thing. How does that? Obviously, there's an eroding of the social taboos going on now with the whole Nick Fuentes on the podcast circuit thing. How does the grounding philosophy have to do with that situation?
Sargon, Carl Benjamin?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
We've had him on the show.
Oh, okay.
We debate liberalism leading to socialism like every
constantly.
year.
Yeah. So I argue with him on X now and again, and it's for exactly this reason. And I take no position on the UK because I don't know enough about the UK's founding and philosophy to make this point there. But as applied to the US, he's going to argue that liberalism intrinsically leads to degeneracy, intrinsically leads to all these bad social ills that he finds problematic, and that it should be rejected in favor of an ideology that would protect native people more profoundly. And my point when I argue with him is that America doesn't need that because we already have a founding philosophy that would protect us and is adequate to the task. The problem is that we're losing it and we're forgetting it, and it's not being implemented. Instead, we have kind of this toothless idea that the belief in democracy and the rule of law is all America stands for without any moral substance to those beliefs. And that's exactly how you get a Fuentes. Is that the argument is that liberalism and classic liberalism is insufficient to protect American interests and thus ought be discarded. Whereas what I'm saying is that those ideas are actually robust and not being well taught, and as a result are misunderstood. And the error is in implementation, not in the ideas themselves. So I think this absolutely is the fight about the the so-called woke right versus the reasonable right.
It sounds like you want to get in here, but I just
I was
go
saying,
ahead.
I think on the upstream downstream thing that you're talking about with taboos and the philosophy is it is easier for people to conceptualize and understand the taboos. And whenever you talk, whenever you're spreading messages broadly in society, unfortunately, the lowest resolution version of that idea is what's going to, going to consume everyone's thought process. But I do think it's still very important to teach the academic or philosophical or more upstream kind of complicated underpinning philosophy of this stuff, because if you don't have it, I think that's part of what leads everyone to fall into the pits of accepting these horrible ideas, whether it be white nationalism or socialism, is because, as you were saying, Ryan, once the taboo erodes, people don't really know why the taboo even existed. And it makes it easier for them to fall prey to bad actors.
Yeah, and the taboos are typically, I agree with you, because most people are not into the philosophy, but the taboos are eroded by people who are into the philosophy, at least, or downstream from them. So,
Right.
like there's been all these studies recently about college students who think that violence is an appropriate way to respond to speech, for example, right? That's a taboo. Like, if you believe that freedom of expression is a form of liberty, is a natural right, you would care very strongly about the taboo against the heckler's veto, against silencing people for expressing their viewpoint. If you, for example, though, merely have a height style harm reduction fairness basis for morality, then that taboo doesn't actually make a lot of sense. If the speaker is doing something really harmful and they're doing things that are unfair and they're spreading an ideology that's going to harm people, shouldn't they be shouted down? Shouldn't they be prevented from speaking? And the taboo against doing those things should be eroded because it's contrary to your moral foundation, whether or not you know why you're doing it. Right. And I think that's part of the problem, is that when the moral foundations go, they're replaced by different moral foundations and different philosophies. And then those philosophies are enacted by people who often have no idea why they're doing it.
Right. Sex Moves from China for 2 Aussies says, are you going to cover Crowder debating Fuentes on Sunday? Maybe. I watched the first 10 minutes of it earlier today, and it was so disappointingly pathetic that I had to turn it off in disgust. So I don't know, maybe Crowder comes back later in the conversation and actually stops sucking Fuentes off and doing some actual interviewing or some pushback or anything. But the part I saw was he was blowing him harder than Tucker. So I don't know. We'll see.
On the CRT thing, I just want to double back here for a second. So you make a good argument that CRT destroyed the social taboo against something like anti-white racism. Like that's where it came into existence and slowly eroded that social taboo. People used to think, racism is bad in any form, even if it's against white people. All of a sudden it's like, okay, well, white people are an oppressor class and it's okay to be racist against your oppressor. So there's some sort of philosophical grounding there. In the social taboo against anti-Semitism on the right specifically, because I do think you can make the argument that anti-Semitism on the left comes from the same source, academia, CRT, all of these kind of grievance studies. But on the right, there has been an erosion of that social taboo against anti-Semitism, which I think a lot of people realize that would hurt the conservative brand. It would hurt the Republican brand. So that's where the taboo came from. But how did that get eroded through some sort of philosophical means?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at like someone like Sargon, again, right? Like, what's he really saying? He's saying
I don't
that,
think he has. I don't think he's had that much influence on it, though. Obviously.
Well, I'm not saying him specifically, but like
Steven Crowder's not having a conversation with Nick Fuentes because Sargon gave him philosophical cover.
No, but what's the idea that people are expressing on, let's call it the woke right or the dissident right? They're rejecting the idea that we ought treat people as individuals. They would like to treat people as representatives of collective groups.
But weren't they always against the social taboo? I'm talking about the people like who all of a sudden are okay with it, who aren't necessarily white nationalists.
Yeah, I mean, are you asking about like someone? So you're not asking about someone who's like an actual Nazi. You're asking about somebody who's,
Yeah, there was
on the fence, but seems to be getting talked into it now.
Yeah, exactly. Because they're the ones that would usually step up and say, there's a social taboo here. And look, I do see that. I do see some people stepping up. This Jillian Michaels person stepped up. Steven Crowder talked about her specifically and said, look, she's not on the right. She doesn't count. She doesn't have any ability to enforce the social taboo.
Yeah, I think that when you start eroding this norm that you have to treat people as individuals, what you end up having is a continuous attempt to treat people on the basis of group membership. And then that just happens over and over and over again, right? So it's not, I disagree with the policy of Israel. It's Jews are bad. It's not, oh my God, there was this giant fraud in Minnesota that was orchestrated by particular Somali people, and we should root it out and punish everybody involved and deport them if necessary. It's all Somalis are garbage and should be deported, right? So they're rather than what they're really rejecting is the norm against group punishment. They are seeking to revert to a state where in-group bias justifies collective guilt and justifies collective punishment. So when they find an example of something they dislike within an ethnic group, they can apply that broadly to the entire ethnic group and then say that those people don't belong in the country anymore.
See, I would say that this goes to what Sitch was saying earlier about this is the common sense. This is the norm between people, tribalism. And the philosophical fights against that tribalism and tries to build up social taboos to strengthen itself. But ultimately, those philosophical, especially in this case, those philosophical arguments prove to be not enough because the taboo's gone. It's evaporated.
Okay, well, I'm not sure this is going to be helpful or not, but here's how I see it. All society is based on nationalism, like blood and soil concept. If you don't have a concept of a nation, you just get conquered by people who do, right? So there has to be some kind of tribal in-group in order to have a society at all. In America, we then built from that foundation and put natural rights, respect for individualism, individual rights on top of that. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, the far left and the far right are rejecting that middle step for different reasons. The far left wants to put equity on top of this foundation. They want to build a new level of the moral pyramid, let's call it. But their version of equity is cannibalistic. It requires eroding all the other foundations. It rejects nationalism. It rejects individual rights, and it just devours the entire structure. So that's one half the horseshoe. The right doesn't necessarily want equity, though some of them do, but they want to return to pure tribalism expressly. So they also want to get rid of the middle step where they're focusing on individual rights, where there's a focus on natural law. And they want to reject it because it allows them to then reassert ethno-identity or religious identity as the paramount virtue and do away with kind of these pesky classic liberal values that get in the way of their project.
All right. That's interesting. It's the philosophical core of it. I think the problem is the philosophical arguments are not persuasive enough to deal with the issue. I do think that collectivism is the status quo. It is the normal way that people think. It is the common sense. And you really have to fight hard against it in order to build up something. Do you think it's the right thing
to do?
To fight against it? Hell yeah, of course. Look, why? I think a lot of ideas that are completely intuitive are horrible. So, look, slavery was intuitive at a time.
But why? Why is it the right thing to fight against it?
For a society that is more powerful, more long-lasting, has more healthy, happy participants.
But that's their argument. They're saying these values are destroying society. That's their whole point is that society is eroding because of those values.
because that is their moral aesthetic.
Yeah.
They're arguing for their moral aesthetic. But look, I don't think they have the numbers.
Sure. But my point is, if someone asked me that question, I have an answer. They're wrong because they don't respect natural rights, and they ought to respect natural rights.
Look, I don't.
No.
I realize you have an answer, but I don't think your answer is persuasive. I think a more persuasive answer is you have to follow the law, otherwise someone's going to show up at your house and arrest you. I think that's a far more persuasive answer.
That is more persuasive.
This philosophical idea that you should follow.
But they're arguing to change the law, not right. So, like, if they change the law, then why that argument doesn't apply anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. They're arguing that we should get rid of the First Amendment and become a theocracy. And the question is, why ought we not do that? And to answer that question, you have to have an alternative moral philosophy and argue that it's better. And this is what I meant. Like, I agree with you that most people don't even know the ideas I'm talking about, but that's why I'm talking about them. Because if we don't have a common understanding of American philosophy, it's going to be very hard to reject un-American philosophy when it tries to replace it.
Why, just on the CRT thing, CRT obviously started as a philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think CRT got such buy-in from academia? Do you think it's because the arguments are persuasive, or do you think they had some sort of material gain to be had by believing it?
Oh, I think it's a bunch of stuff. And I'm not gonna be able to do like data on this, but I can tell you kind of like
just give me your gut intuition on it.
A few things happened. One, postmodernism and post-structuralism is super popular in academia because it is very hard to build a new idea and very easy to endlessly criticize things. So it's just easier to publish if you're a postmodernist, right?
Right. You can and if you publish, you're going to gain status. You're going to gain
so there's a material gain.
So there is a material gain.
Yeah. The other thing is that the current crop of professors were mostly, kind of like 60s, 70s hippies. And a bunch of them were Marxists. And then economic Marxism was proven to just be factually incorrect. Like, it just doesn't work. So you can't being an economic Marxist is a tall order. But then these kind of neo-Marxist disciplines where you replace the bourgeoisie or class consciousness, it's no longer class consciousness, it's race consciousness or gender consciousness or queer consciousness or whatever the new construction is, became very appealing because it's the same permanent revolution framework, but applied in this new area. So I think it was, it just allowed people to transition their old beliefs into new beliefs, and it was popular for that reason. But
none of this is the arguments. None of this is the philosophical arguments. Everyone stands to gain something. That's the reason why it came in vogue.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're pointing out, and I don't disagree with you, is that philosophy does not necessarily mean that people are living up to it and doesn't necessarily dictate what the behavior is. Mm-hmm. But the fact that the philosophy exists and is the idea that people can glom onto is still pretty relevant. Like, if you didn't have Foucault and Derrida creating postmodernism, then people couldn't glom on to postmodernism for whatever selfish reasons they glommed onto it. But there is still a philosophy that they are then pushing, whether or not they're doing it for philosophical reasons.
The question I always encounter, though, is if they didn't have Derrida to glob onto, they'd have someone else. They'd have some other. I can't convince myself that the power is really in the philosophy. I can't really do it.
Well,
but anyway,
it's interesting though, because it always goes both ways. Like at the end of World War II, when we did the Nuremberg trials, mm-hmm. right? Why do we get to stand in judgment of the Nazis?
Because we won.
Because we won.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we won, right?
Exactly.
But then when they opened Nuremberg, they were faced with a legal problem, which was what the Nazis were doing was legal under the laws of Germany.
Right.
So how do you hold people accountable and send them to prison or kill them for a law that didn't exist. They were violating a law that didn't exist at the time. And their answer was genocide violates natural law.
Yes,
swear to God.
I mean, this is not.
Swear to God.
This is not convincing. This is not convincing at all, because they're creating something just to deal with a problem, to deal with a material problem. They're like, this is how we solve this material problem.
Yeah,
so the philosophy doesn't come first and dictate how you solve the material problem. The material problem comes first and dictates how you develop the philosophy.
Well, it is funny, though, how the same philosophy solved the problem of slavery, solved the problem of genocide. It is interesting to point out that...
Did it? Or did the Civil War solve the problem of slavery and the philosophy came afterwards?
It can be both. But B, if mine is the philosophy that was invoked to reject these evils, maybe we shouldn't disregard it so easily. Maybe we shouldn't throw it away into the dustbin of history. It turns out that it's been a pretty good idea. And it might be the people who are attempting to replace it with worse ideas. Maybe that's the thing we should be suspicious of.
Yeah.
And I'm with you. What I need to do is get like a cool decal system where it's like, well, man, like you talked about natural law.
You're like how to brand it
on your chart, like a little incentive.
No, I'm with you. I'm totally with you. Look, and I think there's a lot of value in philosophy, and it is very interesting. The postmodern stuff is great, and I love Stephen Hicks. I've read a lot of Stephen Hicks books. So, and I think it's super interesting. But that question I always have over what really drives history and society? Is it the philosophy, or is it just the material conditions? And there obviously is some back and forth. But I lean towards the material conditions are really most of the time driving the ship.
I need memes because the shit I'm telling you today is all paragraph format. I need some low level.
There you go.
Viral
exactly.
Content.
Taboo. Social taboo.
Yeah. Get people into natural law. They don't even know why they're into natural law. They just love the trading cards. That's what I got to get.
Sitch, you want to respond on any of this?
Not really.
Okay.
You got it. Adam Gadbaugh, thanks so much for the 40 months. Says, I think hating Trump enough is the less version of Piers Morgan's "Do you condemn Hamas?" I'm not sure. I don't know if I'd agree with that in terms of, I always perceive Piers Morgan saying, "Do you condemn Hamas?" just to be like, okay, am I talking to a crazy person or am I talking to someone reasonable? Where I think if you get a conversation with someone on the left and you're like, oh, I didn't vote for Trump, I don't support Trump. And they're like, okay, but you didn't vote against him or you don't hate him enough. To me, that's more like they're more interested in having the online conversation strictly be this team sport of we only care about who wins the next election and that's it. And if you're not on that team, then you're a bad guy.
Right. That people shouldn't listen to and never subscribe to their YouTube channel. It's so silly to me.
Right. Mr.
Go ahead. You want to respond, Ryan?
No, just the purity testing around domestic politics is very tiresome. And I think completely unrelated to purity testing around things like, do you support a group that would enact genocide and a theocracy if they were given the power to do so? Right. Like I think those are we can call those things meaningfully different questions without, I think, too much. That shouldn't be a bone of contention.
Talk about bad faith. Yeah.
I know.
I really hate the vote shaming. If you vote for the best candidate you think to do the job, and then, China invades Taiwan and all of a sudden we're in World War III, people will be like, you voted for this. It's like, no one can see the future. They didn't have they didn't know, they don't have a crystal ball. They didn't know World War III was going to be upon us. So
well, this is what I was telling Destiny this when the last time I talked to him, where it's like, he's taking the position that Trump is an evil Nazi who's currently in control of the government. And I was like, I don't know that you have much rhetorical room left. Like when JD Vance is running and you need to say that JD Vance is somehow worse. What's worse than an evil Nazi in control of the government? Is he going to be like, it's not Hitler, it's Mecha Hitler? Like, where do you go from here? I'm just not sure.
Ultra mega Hitler.
I know. Look at this. You've read our
Mr.
comic,
Bacross.
obviously. You
There
know,
you go.
Yeah.
you know, Robot Hitler's a character in our comic book. So
There you go. Mr. Cross for 14 months says the problem with Roe was it set up constant litigation because of the vast number of edge cases, though I'm still surprised it was overturned. Vance for 42 months. Thanks so much. Says it is fun that Erudite wants to go so hard on you, must not violate your principles ever. But when she was financially hitched to Destiny with all the Sam stuff, she tried to lay low on it.
yeah, of course. What are her principles?
Yeah. Mark Twain's Revenge. Thanks so much for the $10. Says unrelated public announcement. The Catholic Church Commission on allowing female deacons just made an official statement today. No girls allowed based. There you go. Mark Twain's Revenge is in favor of that.
Look at that. Boys Club.
Squeeze Louise for $5 says chat is all using the handles instead of the usernames now. If I can't be Big Daddy Squeezy, what's even the point? This is the end of the West, truly. Yeah, this is a horrible change to YouTube. I have no clue why they keep doing this. Nobody likes it. It's retarded. It makes no fucking sense whatsoever.
And it's oscillating back and forth. Make up your mind.
Right. Ace for $5 says having Erudite on is only fair to avoid a one-sided telling events. Doing so will help avoid the claim that you guys are biased against the left. Well, there's two things, Ace. Number one, I actually don't give a shit if anyone says that anymore.
Yeah.
At all. I'm tired of it. And I said this in terms of, I don't remember who we're talking about, who we're talking to. I think it might have been one of the people that's in the Erudite, sphere of Destiny orbiters. I'm just tired of the conversation. It's so fucking boring. That's why I couldn't even listen to her conversation with Ryan, because I'm just like, I'm so tired of this. And you said it yourself. You're like, I've had this conversation with all these fucking people. I don't want to have this conversation. It's so fucking boring. It's so lame and pathetic and cringe. I don't care anymore. If someone on the left says, oh, we're too biased against the left, they can fuck off and kill themselves. The same way that all these retarded grapers are like, you guys are too hard on the right. It's like, you can never win. Actually, you know what? That's good. If there's people on the left that say we're too hard on the left, the people on the right say we're too hard on the right, that's perfect. That means that we're doing our thing. Okay.
Yeah. But only kill themselves in Minecraft, obviously, not.
Yeah.
There you go.
No, it's a ridiculous game, and the only way to win is to not play.
Yeah. It's just
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Ace for $10 says, what are your thoughts on the recent Trump-Ukraine affair? You guys want to give him a fair chance to matter, and as of late, things aren't looking good on that front. I think that Trump has basically sabotaged his administration's ability. I shouldn't say just him, but his entire administration has sabotaged his administration's ability to actually do anything with Ukraine other than to just let Putin do whatever the fuck he wants, because they keep being so wishy-washy about the whole thing. And it's very clear there's not a unified goal that's working in the administration, that you have, what's his name? I forget his name, that's doing the deals. He obviously is very soft on Russia and kind of just wants to end the whole thing. And Marco Rubio keeps trying to pull it back every time. These deals are horrible. So I think because of the flip-flopping, because of the wishy-washiness, nothing is really going to get accomplished.
Yeah,
Yeah,
his brand of being the crazy man that would actually do something about it has completely evaporated. So he doesn't really have that power anymore in the
and I think that is
negotiations.
going to hurt.
Yeah.
And it is going to hurt with China and Taiwan and with any other future conflict, because you're exactly correct.
Yeah.
There's an apocryphal story in the New York legal community. I don't know if it's true, but that Trump was trying to do a real estate deal, and the lawyers were negotiating, and it wasn't going well. So he took his lawyers outside of the boardroom and yelled at them, like, you motherfuckers, you go in there and you get me a fucking deal or you're all fired. So they went in and they got a deal, but it was a fucking terrible deal, right? Because if you tell the other side that what you're really interested in is making a deal, that's actually leverage that can be used against you. And I think that's what happened here. It's too obvious that what he wants is a peace deal rather than wanting a position. And when it's, if people understand your motivation like that, it's kind of easy to play you.
Right. Brian for $10 says, I don't think the trial and error process takes away from the philosophical argument. Just like science, we learn from our trial and error to discover what's true. It's the same with philosophy.
Based.
I think Kickness or Nick Costanza's super chat might have gotten deleted because he was accidentally banned,
Oh,
I think, by
what
Zero
did it-
Fucks. But
What did it say?
just put it in the normal chat, Nick, and we'll read whatever it is.
Oh, okay.
Oh, Zero Fucks, what are you doing?
I think it was an
know.
accident. Sometimes it happens. You're like,
Ace for $10 says this episode isn't helping you guys beat the obsession with tiny allegations. Adam doesn't help when he thinks not being philosophically illiterate means you're a tiny fan. This isn't worth talking about. Now, I'm going to be honest.
What is that? What does that
I'm going to
even
be honest.
mean?
There were parts of the conversation that I was looking at the chat or was reading something. I didn't hear you mention Destiny. Was there some
Not
Destiny
once. No.
Okay, so I'm going to say Ace. I think I think the only person with a Destiny obsession is you because that never even came up in the conversation.
Yeah.
Ace for $5 says Jay is so fine with his masculinity that he chooses the 2020s video haircut as a profile pic, a true inspiration for modern day ideas of manhood. Well, I'm going to say that you're jealous. And yes,
There you go.
it's true. Squeeze the Leads for $5 says Crowder. Quote, Nick, are you racist? Fuentes. No, Crowder. Well, there you go, folks. I don't see what the problem is. Why would he lie? Yeah, see, that's the part I saw, and I just turned it off because I was just like, what the fuck am I watching?
I know he teed him up. He completely teed him up.
Yeah, it's just so pathetic.
You got to do something, right? Like during Fuentes' conversation with Tucker, Fuentes at one point just goes like, I really admire Stalin, like totally out of left field. And Tucker goes,
Yes.
we'll get back to that. And they never did.
Does,
I was like,
he
you
does
should probably-
go in on that, but it's kind of a pathetic. It's drowning in modern day politics. I mean, he doesn't really do a good job. Coleman Hughes did a video that everyone should watch. I'm assuming you've seen it, Sitch.
I didn't watch that video yet.
Oh, you didn't? Oh,
No.
watch that video. Coleman Hughes definitely goes to town.
Mm-hmm.
And he's always excellent. His stuff is typically always great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The problem is there's not 20 of them, so they can get their diversity quotas in. Because if you had, if we could just clone Coleman Hughes, we'd have no problem, right? That guy's like a fucking genius.
Trolling Duckies for 27 months says next time you guys talk to Sargon, ask him about his take on the U.S. integration, guns, and Tex-Mex. His takes are shaky. Sitch a team supreme. Thank you. There you go. Fondue for $20. Thank you, Fondue. Says when it comes to morality, I believe the point is testing your code against reality and competing codes. Not so much that your morals create good outcomes, but that the outcomes prove your views as closer to accurate. Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, there is obviously morality. Sometimes you can do things that are at the expense of society that are in favor of you and your family. So
Yes.
that's where things get more tricky about
Yeah.
the outcomes, right?
Fondue for $10 says, I think the advantage of the American model is that it can fold most groups into civic identity over a racial one. 100%. 100%. That is, I think, what has helped America thrive and survive and be as successful it is. And the problem is that it does require a very strong civic identity or civic model to fold people into. And unfortunately, when the left chipped away at that so much over the last 50, 60 years, people then it's all lost, and now people have to fall back onto other things like communism or white nationalism or whatever nonsense is going on right now.
Yeah, we should have picked the fight 20 years ago, and it would have been better to pick it 10 years ago, and it would have been better to pick it 5 years ago. But I get the next best time is today, so let's pick the fight. Like I agree with you. I think the left chipped away at this moral foundation over time, and we have to reassert it. Otherwise, it's up for grabs.
Right. Yeah. What Gypsy Harlow that the super chat got lost? You can just put it in
Oh,
normal chat.
he doesn't remember it. He said it's fine. He'll get us
Oh no, I
later
see
on.
it. It says I read it. Well, I see one of them. It was morality is whoever wins the chimp out. Unless there's a
That wasn't.
second
I don't
one.
think that was it.
Oh, okay.
I think it was later on. I saw it going
Right.
through, but it's okay. No worries. He says it's fine. He'll get us some other time.
Or no, it was
Thanks.
Nick Costanza. I forgot my question,
Yeah.
so you guys can have my $5.
All right, fair enough.
Thank you.
That works.
Well, anyway, thanks for coming on, Ryan. It was an interesting conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
man,
this was great.
Real pleasure, and thank you, Zero Fucks, for setting this up. I'm Ryan Mullally. I'm an attorney. I stream sporadically because it is an attorney first and family man first, and then streaming like distant third. But if you want to talk about law, American philosophy, originalism, my channel's a fun place to be. And thank you guys for having me on. And if you ever want a hot take about some legal issue or some philosophical issue, hope you reach
my
out.
God.
It was a real pleasure meeting you guys.
Sitch loves those hot takes on legal issues. He eats them
yeah,
up.
it's true. It's
Yeah.
true.
I mean, that's always fun. And as somebody who comments on legal issues, this administration certainly keeps me busy. There's no shortage of stuff to talk about.
True.
All right.
Okay.
Take care.
Take care, everybody. See you
Are we
Sunday.
are we signing off as well, Sitch?
Yeah.
Okay. Talk to you
Cheers.
guys.
Thank you
on
guys so
Sunday.
much. Really appreciate it.
Take care.
Okay.